Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This.
Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the 33rd meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members are attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf, and witnesses are in person and then via Starleaf?
Then via Starleaf, yeah.
That's great, thank you. The meeting will be broadcast live and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. I just remind members to mute their tablets by pushing F4. So moving on to item number 1, we have apologies from Christopher, and
Yes.
I think everybody else is
Everybody
here
else
or
is
joining.
here or joining, yeah.
Thank you. Moving on then, number 2, draft minutes. There's a copy of the draft minutes from last week's meeting at page 5 of your pack. Are members content that these are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Great.
Great, thank you. So moving on then, item number 3, chairperson's business. Following the discussion at last week's meeting, the clerk asked the department about the minister's intentions in relation to bringing forward the LCM on whether or not she would bring forward an LCM on the internal market bill. The department has indicated that the internal market bill is currently being considered and the minister will be discussing with her executive colleagues. The timescale, as outlined in standing orders for a memorandum to be brought forward, has now elapsed. There is correspondence from the minister at page 205 of the pack regarding amendments to the bill, which restates the minister's position that this is a complex bill which will require executive discussion. The clerk has written to stakeholders seeking views in anticipation of any LCM that may be laid and a committee report being required in respect of that. So we will keep that one.
We'll keep that going, Chair.
Then at page 3 of your table papers, there is a briefing from the clerk of the committee for procedures seeking views of all the committees in relation to the extension of temporary provisions contained in standing orders 110 to 116 regarding voting and proxy voting until the 31st of January. This was discussed last week at the chairperson's liaison group, and we've already signalled that we're content. So just want to put it to members to see if they have any views in relation to that.
Content? Yep.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 4 is our briefing from the Minister on COVID-19 response and economic recovery. There is a memo at page 11 of the pack. There's a copy of a letter from the Minister to myself or to Justin Edwards of SIA regarding the delivery and assessment of vocational qualifications in the coming year. There is a departmental briefing on economic recovery in the medium term at page 22 of the pack. A departmental briefing, COVID-19 additional allocation exercise at page 36, and a report commissioned by the department on an integrated economic skills and innovation policy agenda at page 63 of your pack. So I'd like to welcome to this morning's meeting the Minister Diane Dodds, Permanent Secretary Mike Brennan, and Head of Analytical Services Shane Murphy. So if I hand over to yourself, Minister, to make an opening statement, and then we'll pick up with some questions.
Thank you, Chair, as always. So, to the committee in general, thank you for giving me the opportunity to update you on what I and the department are doing to rebuild the Northern Ireland economy. It has been said many times before how this is a rapidly evolving landscape, and even this week we have seen decisions taken in London, Cardiff, Edinburgh and here at Stormont that will have an impact on the economy and once again change where and what government interventions will be required to help the economy. Last night, the First Minister made clear in her comments that the new restrictions apply to the home and that business, hospitality and the economy should continue to function. But let me be equally clear this morning. The Northern Ireland economy cannot afford another lockdown. Those small shoots of recovery that we are currently seeing would be destroyed. Even the fear alone of another lockdown would remove any lingering hopes that businesses have of economic recovery. This is costing jobs and impacting on families. This committee will be well aware of the vital recovery work that has been ongoing for some time, and be well aware that we engage in this work parallel with protecting people's health and responding to the restrictions agreed at the executive. It is a huge challenge for government and a huge challenge for business. Just as business owners, workers, college staff, students and others have adapted and revised their plans, so must we all. That is why I launched my economic recovery plan in June, and this document, Rebuilding a Stronger Economy, is the template for the short to medium term recovery and interventions in the Northern Ireland economy. It was adopted by the executive as part of its recovery strategy. Taking account of the new world we are living in, it sets out how we build a more competitive, inclusive and greener economy. But to use the buzzwords, we have also been agile and nimble in delivering strategic and targeted interventions to help with the economy We haven't needed a strategy to get on with delivering help, and I will address some of those interventions in a few minutes. I understand the role that the committee has in examining these interventions and in highlighting areas and sectors that are in need of ongoing support. And I know that this committee will have also been listening to economists, business leaders and trade unionists about the type of interventions that make the greatest impact. Going forward, as well as challenges, there will be opportunities. I want to work with the committee to ensure that we grasp those opportunities. We are in the business of supporting the core industries in the economy, manufacturing, agri-food and tourism, but we must also concentrate on areas where we know Northern Ireland can do well. This includes the high growth areas of advanced manufacturing, life and health sciences, digital and clean energy. I was a little alarmed to hear a comment previously that because we were doing well in the digital economy space that we should divert our attentions elsewhere. The reality is that the digital and tech sector underpins virtually every other sector in the economy. So investing in the digital economy is an investment in the whole economy. We are global leaders in cybersecurity. To stay there, we must continue to invest in skills in that area. I have submitted 32 bids to the Department of Finance to deliver a wide-ranging and comprehensive programme of interventions to rebuild our economy. These bids are strategically aligned to our plan published in June and have been identified in collaboration with business leaders, economists and the Economic Advisory Group, who have all played a key role in advising on these interventions. Other issues such as labour market prospects, our skills agenda and indeed wider policy development. As we plan for a future, hopefully free from COVID-19, we also must determine how best to live and work with the virus whilst it's here. I have been at the forefront of trying to get the economy open again, albeit in a way that is safe and sensible, and the best help that government can provide to business is to let them trade. I agree with the Deputy Chair of the Committee when she said at the weekend that the economy cannot afford another lockdown. We all understand the economic impact of the last one. To date, we have spent $408 million on 20 separate initiatives responding to the impact of COVID. This includes rapidly introducing business grants, which have helped over 30,000 businesses to survive the lockdown and beyond. The Tourism Recovery Steering Group I established is leading on the planning and preparations for regrowth of that sector. Through this group, we have delivered a number of key priorities, such as reopening the sector safely, providing operational guidelines, an industry charter mark, and targeting marketing activity to stimulate business. A draft Tourism Recovery Action Plan is also in development to support this important sector. Many businesses across our economy are now back to being busy, are trading well, and sit as exemplars of how to operate during these difficult times. Diversifying, collaborating and innovating, whilst protecting employees and customers. Some have even been able to announce jobs in recent months. During the most difficult of times, it is worth reminding ourselves that almost 1,000 new jobs have been announced since April, and I know that there are more to come. For other businesses, recovery will be a longer process. I and my department will remain by their side to provide whatever support and advice we can. We have already identified a range of measures to help vulnerable but viable businesses, with funding of around $25 million secured for 2020-21. I have also asked InvestNI to develop a number of schemes to support business and economic recovery, and I announced the first two earlier this month. The Digital Selling Capability Grant is aimed at helping retail and wholesale businesses to grow their business online. The new $5 million COVID-19 Equity Investment Fund will also provide access to finance for innovative SMEs to support growth. The delivery of new broadband infrastructure under Project Stratum will play a vital role in rebuilding our regional economy as we emerge from the COVID crisis. Our greatest asset and the key to a sustainable recovery is Northern Ireland's people. which is why I have prioritised the importance of skills development. Our strong skills base has already attracted jobs and investment to Northern Ireland, and I want to build on this. That is why I've invested over 20 million in an apprenticeship recovery package. I want to encourage employers to bring the 4,500 apprentices back from furlough and support them through to completion. Up to £3,700 is available per apprentice to encourage return and retention. I have also allocated 12.5 million to support employers to create apprenticeship opportunities. Employers will receive 3,000 for each new opportunity created. Thousands of students are back to classes at our further education colleges and other training providers, where they are taking part in blended learning with a mix of online and in-person teaching. This reopening is so important for the mental health of our young people, as well as ensuring that we keep their education and training on track. Building the skills among the workforce of the future is essential. I introduced many measures to support the Northern Ireland economy through the most difficult of times. As well as help from the Northern Ireland Executive, there was also government support available from the UK government to assist businesses, including the furlough and self-employment support schemes. The ending of these two schemes, I believe, is premature, and I am firm in my belief that they must be extended to support jobs in our local economy. I again have written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer asking him to extend these schemes. This is of particular importance for sectors which may take longer to recover. For example, aerospace, retail, hospitality, leisure, tourism and the arts. And government announcements over recent days, I believe, will compound those challenges for those sectors. But extending the furlough scheme or a variant of the same would not just be important for those sectors. It would probably also provide us in government here with more room to manoeuvre with our own local policies, where we would all aim to help key, viable businesses through to the other side of the crisis. Would I like to be able to do more? Of course. I totally understand the frustration of businesses who have found it difficult to secure financial support. I have met with representatives from the excluded NI group and fully understand their situation. My primary aim from the beginning has been to support as many businesses as practical, supplementing those key national schemes which, due to their sheer size, are the bedrock for this recovery phase. The business support grant schemes were administered on behalf of the Executive. Unspent funding had to be returned to the Department of Finance for reallocation, as it was ring-fenced by the Executive. I had no discretion to spend it elsewhere. I continue to push for more financial support to be made available to those still in need, including for the newly self-employed, small businesses and indeed the manufacturing sector. We must also be strategic in how we deliver support. We must be able to justify interventions and demonstrate how that support will make an impact. We are all being lobbied by various sectors, groups and individuals, and none of this is easy. Very difficult decisions will have to be taken. I have provided a detailed options paper to the Executive which identifies the support gaps. This builds on the economic recovery paper that I published in June. While dealing with the impact of the pandemic, businesses are, of course, also doing their best to prepare for the onset of the protocol and the outcome of the negotiations. It is important to note that they can also avail of a wide range of support available from Invest NI and Intertrade Ireland. And while we await further clarity on some issues, there are things that businesses can do now to ensure they are ready to face both the challenges and the opportunities from January 1st. These are tough times, probably the toughest times many of our business owners have ever faced. We know it will be some time before economic activity is back to the levels it was before the pandemic descended, and we will continue to support businesses the economy, jobs and families.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that update. This committee has also written to the Chancellor in relation to the self-employed income support scheme and the furlough scheme, asking both of those be extended. We heard from, as you referenced in your remarks, from economists last week in relation to the importance of that, and also how those supports need to be developed going forward as well to support people in terms of perhaps being trained for future jobs, as well as keeping that connection with their current employer. And I think that's an important consideration to make in relation to that as well. If I could just pick up on a number of issues, and there's an awful lot that we would like to discuss obviously this morning, but we want to get as many members in as possible. So if I start with the bids in relation to recovery, have you an indication of when those are likely to be considered by the executive? Are you hoping?
Well,
that those
I
are
first
tomorrow?
submitted, sorry to cut across you, apologies. I first submitted those bids in July. We are still waiting on those. We've had sort of like a version 1, version 2 of those, of the responses, but that process is still ongoing. It is really important that we get to the end of that process as quickly as possible for 2 reasons. One, the economy absolutely needs the interventions that those bids represent. We have put in almost £90 million worth of bids. That's what those 32 bids represent. And as I said, they are strategically aligned to the document that we published in June and which has been adopted by the executive. And they cover all aspects of the economy, from the digital sector to the skills issues and to tourism and hospitality, areas which I think even after yesterday will require particular attention. So I would like to see those bids through, because not only does the economy need those bids, but also those are in-year spends. So they have to be spent by the end of the year. And as you and I all know, spending profitably and wisely takes time, and we need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I know when the officials were with us a couple of weeks ago, they did say that additional information was asked for in relation to those. And I suppose if I consider the economic strategy, the recovery strategy in the medium term, it strikes me that there is a lack of clear objectives and actions that can be linked directly to the bids, and that was something that we had put to the officials, and they had said that they would come back with a written briefing of how the bids were going to align to the economic strategy. It would be useful if perhaps that we could get that, because I don't think we have
Process, we haven't had it yet, Chair, but it's in process.
And I know the Finance Minister expressed his frustration last week that those allocation of bids wasn't discussed at the executive meeting, because he also wants to progress with the allocation of those. I think we all want to see those interventions get out as quickly as possible, so hopefully that will move forward this week. If I could just maybe ask you in relation to students returning to universities and colleges as well. Obviously has been the focus of much discussion over the last week. And I know that the universities have had plans in place for return to campus over the summer months. Some of those maybe having to be revised at this point. In terms of your engagement with them, has there been advice forthcoming from the department to the universities, and also engaging with the student unions around the return to campus? And obviously there's a role there for the Health Minister as well. Has there been that cross-departmental focus in relation to that?
My department almost daily is in touch with the universities, both Queen's and Ulster. You know that there has been group meetings set up across departments in relation to the particular issues around antisocial behaviour, and how universities can help to ensure that students behave responsibly. We, of course, as a department, are part of that group as well. But universities are autonomous institutions, and they do set their own guidelines and rules. They have a very fairly rigorous set of guidelines around life on campus, and what people should do, and things like, you know, one-way systems, you know, lectures, etc., etc. And I understand that they are working, particularly Queen's in the Holy Land, are working with the PSNI, Belfast City Council, and the Students' Union around the campus community pledge, and also around sanctions for those who have not behaved well. And I am really actually very, very concerned about that. I just, in anticipation of this meeting today, asked for a breakdown of those sanctions and how things were going. That Friday, the 18th of September, Queen's issued a statement to all students advising that should the university receive notification of a COVID breach from the PSNI, students would receive a precautionary suspension with immediate effect for up to 14 days. As of the 22nd of September, yesterday, the university has issued 27 cautionary of those suspensions. Now, I am really concerned about that because, you know, many of us here have been to university. We've loved life at university. But those sanctions could have significant repercussions for students, particularly in professional subjects where those may trigger fitness to practice issues. And I would absolutely appeal, should any of them ever hear of what we are doing here this morning, to students to obey the rules, to look after each other, to, you know, be absolutely aware of the precautions that they need to take in relation to this pandemic, and not to engage in antisocial behaviour. It might seem like fun now, but it could have dreadful health consequences for those you love, and it could have consequences for your later life. So I issue that as a very stark warning to students, and I will support the universities in taking action to ensure that, one, people are safe, and that students know that there are rules that have to be obeyed.
And I guess that just, I suppose the student leadership has also been very vocal,
Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
expressing those very strong messages, and they are severe sanctions that are being imposed. And you know, it's not something that is undertaken lightly, and it's not something that is supported lightly either. This is a public health emergency, and we do all appeal for sensible heads to prevail in relation.
And let's be honest, really, with the vast and overwhelming bulk of students
That's very important.
will be very, very responsible. They are there to study, they are there to progress their lives and their careers, and they will be very responsible. So in looking at a small minority, we shouldn't forget that vast bulk of young people who are absolutely fine and will be respectful of each other, the rules on campus, and their neighbours wherever they live.
I think that's very important to emphasise, that it is a small minority. Minister, could I just pick up then briefly in relation to the internal market bill and where that is currently sitting in respect of your role in the department in terms of engaging on that, and also on the broader issues, I suppose, in terms of the protocol implementation through the negotiations?
Right, well, the internal market bill, as you know, is going through its committee stage in Parliament. I have forgotten today exactly which particular part of the committee stage it's at, but that's where it's at. For us in the department, we of course are looking at the internal market bill. We have asked for a legal opinion on the devolution aspects of the Internal Market Bill, and I haven't as yet received any of those. As soon as we have received those, then we will, of course, discuss the issue with executive colleagues and come to a conclusion.
And just in relation to the future free trade agreements and the access to both the future UK free trade agreements and also the EU free trade agreements, has there been progress in relation to the EU free trade agreement?
Well, I wish I had direct contact with David Frost so that I could, or Michel Barnier, so that I could actually answer that for you in a meaningful way. But let's be absolutely clear, the best outcome for Northern Ireland, the best outcome for the economy of Northern Ireland is to come to a negotiated agreement, to have a free trade agreement, which would give us into that zero tariff realm and allow us to trade effectively. But absolutely vitally important to Northern Ireland as well, and this is where the operation of the protocol, from where I see it, puts Northern Ireland at a disadvantage, is the access to our main market in GB. Over 50% of everything that we make or sell goes to market in Great Britain. It is absolutely and utterly vital that we have that unfettered access to our main market. It is equally important that we have complete freedom of trade within the UK internal market, and that includes GB to NI checks. If we take about 2/3 of everything that we need for the high street or for the manufacturing process comes from GB. Absolutely essential that we have freedom to operate within the UK's internal market. And if ever I needed a practical demonstration of that, I got it a couple of weeks ago when I went up to look at the expansion of a company up near Macrofelt. And that company were expanding because their business was hugely expanding in the GB market. And that created an additional 130 jobs in that particular area. And if ever we needed the absolute certainty that we need to be able to trade both NI to GB, GB to NI, with freedom within the internal market, going to the company, seeing how their products, clearly really top-class products, really doing very well, but their expansion in the GB market was actually adding 130 jobs in Northern Ireland at a time in manufacturing jobs when those are scarce and difficult to come by.
Yeah, I think we would all agree the importance of the British market, but I think we also have to look at the quantum, I suppose, that goes now south to EU and to the rest of the world through EU trade agreements, and in both goods and services more now go into what is called the export market. So for me it is also critically important that we see that free trade agreement with the EU, and I think that there really needs to be a very strong message in terms of that, and any, I suppose, additional issues that are created by the progression of the internal market bill is causing huge difficulties for all of us who want to see a really good outcome for businesses right across the board here, regardless of where they trade. There's just one final thing that I would like to pick up on in terms of, it's included in the annual report, and it's maybe one for Mike as much as yourself, Minister. There is a figure quoted in terms of the small business grants. It's a qualification on the department's accounts, and there's a figure of 13.5 million in ineligible payments, which is an extrapolated figure as I understand it. And there's another figure from LPS of I think 3.5 million. Do those equate, or what is the issue in relation to that?
So the issue there is the 13.5 million figure quoted in the Audit Office report. It's an estimate based on a sampling exercise they conducted on the total grants that were paid out. So that's currently being checked, and we will, as LPS and ourselves, work through the actual grants paid out, and we start to explore, those that are deemed to be in error. That figure will change. The 3.5 million, my understanding is in reference to issues identified within the LPS element of it.
Okay, thank you. And I know we all anticipated that there would be error in this process, that this was a very blunt instrument of administering grants. Is this perhaps more than you were expecting in terms of ineligibility?
No, if you think about it in this context, Chair, you know, there was some £340 million of grants paid out, and the Audit Office make reference to, you know, potentially errors in the realm of 13.5 million. From recollection, the National Audit Office looked at the Treasury, the HMRC scheme, and identified potential errors somewhere in the order of 3.5 billion, which equated to about 10%, so our figures would seem to be considerably lower.
Sinead, can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Good morning, Minister. Thank you very much for your briefing once again this morning. We had a very sober briefing last week from two economists, Richard Ramsey and Paul Flynn. And we know now at this stage the impact that COVID-19 is having in our economy and will have in the coming weeks and months. And lots of businesses have been excluded from support, many small firms, the self-employed without a long trading history. So what I want to really ask the Minister is, you know, what is she going to do to help those excluded firms specifically? And what conversations is she having with the Treasury in London about a replacement furlough scheme? And it may not be the same furlough scheme that we currently have. You know, it could be a job protection scheme. We could be looking at wage subsidies. We could be looking at maybe national insurance or employers' insurance, things like that to be reduced. National insurance contributions, and some further job creation schemes, you know, in relation to the public service. So can she give me any ideas what those conversations with the Treasury are taking place now, so that we can maybe reassure these businesses that are just facing a cliff edge now in another few weeks?
Okay. Thank you, Sinead. Again, I refer to your comments on Sunday, and I absolutely agree with you that the Northern Ireland economy cannot afford to have another lockdown. It would be devastating for businesses in Northern Ireland, and it would have a further impact on jobs and families in Northern Ireland. So just to say that I think that there are many, many things that we in this committee and the department and I as Minister can work together on and can agree on and push forward for the Northern Ireland economy. And I think that's very, very important to say. You're well aware, and I've reiterated this for some considerable period of time, that I do believe that the impact of ending both the furlough scheme and the self-employed scheme in October will be quite significant for the economy. And if you consider the potential double whammy, where there is some chatter on the wires around a circuit break for everyone at the end of October, then I think the two things together would be really quite devastating for us. And I have written in that respect again to the Chancellor this week to absolutely re-emphasise that with additional restrictions on our lives, that the ending of the schemes would be very important. And just let me just go on for a little bit, because I do think it is important to say this. I have also been very clear that the tail of recovery for some sectors in our economy will be much longer and much greater than for others. And I speak virtually on a weekly basis to BES, which is the Department for the Economy's reporting department in Whitehall. So I speak on virtually a weekly basis around the issues around further support for tourism, further support for our aerospace companies who are in a very, very difficult situation at the moment, and where I think the recovery will take some considerable time. You will have seen the First and Deputy First Minister call, along with the ministers, First Ministers from Scotland and Wales, for a UK task force to provide national interventions to the aerospace industry. And I think it's important that this committee and everyone else keeps up the pressure at that level to ensure that we have that very, very specific intervention in an industry for Northern Ireland which provides around 10,000 well-paid jobs and very, very highly skilled jobs, and those jobs are in significant difficulty. So I think that, I, like you, support the extension of furlough, and I think in certain sectors, whether it's the blanket furlough or a more targeted furlough, in certain sectors it will be almost impossible for a shorter recovery time if we don't have that help for jobs and firms in Northern Ireland. So that's a really important issue around that. For us here as well, in relation to those who may feel that they have not been supported at the moment, you are all aware that I provided the Executive with a paper in June. I think it was discussed around the middle or end of June at the Executive around the different groupings of those who so far have not received support. I think the Executive revised that again and looked at that again during the summer. And again on the 13th of August, I raised the paper again at the Executive meeting asking for consideration of these particular issues. Now, of course, I also respect the will and the wishes of the Assembly Chamber, and I have asked my officials to look at some of the issues in relation to these particular schemes. And indeed, they have been in contact with their counterparts in both Wales and Scotland. And in due course, I will also bring these considerations to the Executive. So these are things that are ongoing and important for us all. It does weigh heavily on our mind that the Northern Ireland economy is in a perilous situation at this particular time, and that it has very gravely impacted on the prospects and livelihoods of individuals and families. None of us, including me or the department, are not cognizant of that fact. I think I may have answered it all, Sinead, but I'm not sure. If I haven't, I'm sure you'll come back to me.
Well, thank you, Minister, for that. And maybe there's a little bit of hope at the end for some of those businesses that have been left out. And as I have said last week, we talk a lot about recovery. Businesses are not in recovery really at the moment. They're just in survival mode. They're only clinging on by their fingernails. We need to make, I know you've produced a paper, it's a short-term and mid-term supports for businesses, but we really, really need to think of the long-term. If we are to revive our economy after COVID, then we need long-term planning. And I just don't see that. Now, this is not a criticism just of the economy. I think it's a criticism of the entire Executive because we haven't got a priority programme for government within the Executive. And last week we heard very strongly from the economists that, our long-term deficits that we have had here, challenges that we've had here in Northern Ireland for decades and haven't tackled. For example, like our skills strategy and the skill deficits that we have, the many people that we have that leave school with no qualifications, and the impact of that has on our productivity going forward. We also have infrastructure deficits, water deficits. I know you may say that's a different department, but it's not. It's an all programme for government that we require in order to overcome some of the really deep challenges that we have in our economy here. We, as you know, I don't need to tell you, Minister, that we have difficulties regarding our productivity, etc., etc. If we don't take a long-term view, and while we welcome the recovery plan, it's not adequate and it's not going to do it. It's not going to take Northern Ireland out of the depths of the unemployment that we have here. So we need to be more ambitious. We need to think big picture stuff and tackle that. And just before I leave that, then in the Internal Markets Bill, Minister, I absolutely beseech you to oppose this bill. It is bad. It will destroy devolution in this country. It is a power grab. And the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government have rejected it, and I would ask you to reject it on the behalf of the people of Northern Ireland also.
I'm going to resist answering the last bit, Sinead. I didn't come to the economy to make party political points, and I am going to resist answering that particular one. And if you really want to debate on it, I of course could at any stage. I agree with you. I think we need to look to the bigger picture. Our strategy in the department has been to restart the economy, try to rebuild in the short to medium term, and then to renew the economy. And those three words are the three things that we have been trying to do. So we have largely restarted our economy. And I think in a safe and reasonably sensible way. That has provided huge challenges for businesses, not least of all the money that many businesses have spent in putting in measures for social distancing, etc. And I pay tribute to those businesses. They have worked hard to get their business up and running. And that rebuilding of the economy is an ongoing process. And as you say, obviously, in light of the changing circumstances, at times has to change and vary according to the circumstances. But the renewing of the economy is the big picture. And in that, my department are currently working on a new energy strategy for Northern Ireland. We are currently working on a new skills strategy for Northern Ireland. Since 2012, there has been a deficit in the amount of funding that has gone to skills in Northern Ireland. I would welcome the help of this committee in highlighting that deficit, in working with me to ensure that we recover that deficit and build better for the skills infrastructure of Northern Ireland. When I talk to people who are coming to invest in Northern Ireland, they tell me that one of the reasons they want to invest in Northern Ireland is because of our skills base. But I want that skills base not just to be a degree or higher level apprenticeship level. I want that skills base to reach every part of the community. And I think that that is an incredibly important thing, not just for the economy, but for peace, prosperity in Northern Ireland. And I think that's hugely, hugely important. So we are also then working on that economic strategy. And again, I welcome the input from this committee and would encourage the committee to actually make those submissions to the department and those ideas and so on, so that we can discuss and debate and decide what is really good for the Northern Ireland economy and how we actually take it forward. So I'm up for the challenge. I hope this committee are up for the challenge, and I'm up for the challenge of that partnership working with the committee to ensure that we actually get an economic strategy for the future that will be good for the next 100 years of Northern Ireland.
Minister, Chair.
Sorry, Mike wants to...
Sorry, just to add to the Minister's comments there and to pick up on the Deputy Chair's observations about the medium to long term importance. We have bids in for some £87 million worth of interventions for the remaining months of this financial year. Many of those bids have tails into the next financial year, and we have no guarantee that they will be met. Indeed, we have no budget set at all for the coming years, so which makes it incredibly difficult to make detailed allocations on things like skills or energy or business support beyond the 1st of April next year. So, as the Minister says, this plan that we have in front of us is really the recovery and revitalisation. It's about keeping businesses alive. The economic strategy is a longer-term vision, so really it's a two-phased approach. The importance of actually setting a definition around that second phase is the outcome of the comprehensive spending review and having budgets that can determine what interventions we can take forward.
Thanks, Mike. And Minister, we'll take on board your comments there as well in terms of...
Could I just give the committee some encouragement? And I think it's really, really important. I was just looking at this last night, and the Assured Skills Academies, we can say with absolute certainty that 80 to 85% of the participants of the Assured Skills Academies are now in full-time employment. And those are the kind of flexible kind of interventions in the skills area that really are welcomed by employers and companies coming into Northern Ireland. And we have done a number of those actually since March, one of which was in the fintech sector. And actually 23 out of 24 young people on that Skills Academy course delivered remotely are now in employment. I think those are the kind of things that we should be encouraged by. But as I'm saying, I'm ambitious for skills in Northern Ireland, and I wanted to reach all of our young people. You're quite right, Sinead, when you say too many young people leave school without qualifications. We want to look at that, we want to rectify that, and we want to make sure that they have skills that take them into the future.
Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, and your officials for coming in this morning. I think we again put in record our thanks for all your work and diligence, right from the start. From, I suppose, we all got heavily involved early on this year, and all the work and the effort that has been put in to support businesses, large businesses and indeed small, and we all recognise the needs to continue to do that when we consider the ongoing crisis. And I'm sure you've already covered the issue that you intend to look at additional support where possible for businesses right across the whole spectrum. Would you agree, Minister, that it is important that there are clear, consistent messages coming through in relation to the economy and the whole issue of health? The two issues are very much interrelated. We've heard the First Minister on last night talking about a big push. Can you reassure us that, the executive are united, the five-party executive that some members here seem to forget about, five-party executive, that we have strong support within that executive, number one, to deal with the health issue, and number two, in relation to the economy? I think that's important, that there's a clear, consistent message goes out. And moving forward, we're moving up in relation to the economy. Christmas is coming upon us, and I trust Christmas will happen. But we want to make sure Christmas happens for the high streets within our towns, our villages, our cities. It's one of the big areas where it's the harvest time for them, and we need to ensure that confidence is there. Confidence for the public going out, that their place is safe, that they are indeed encouraged to go out and shop locally. I think that's vitally important and something we want to see continue. And I know there's been a lot of work done with the councils and other agencies, but we want assurance that will continue. In relation to tourism, and I know you've spent a lot of effort in tourism, and we were at an hotel last week within my own constituency, and we saw the efforts that are being made there. But I think we need to continue to encourage staycations. People do still want breaks. We want to make sure that there's confidence in the sector, and that the places that people go to are clean again and hygienic and working to high standards. That must be continued and must be promoted. Finally, my last point is about foreign direct investment. Are there any strong indicators there that there's still an interest in foreign direct investment coming to Northern Ireland against all the difficulties? And my final bit on that is about manufacturing that I've gone on about for some time. We again, and within our constituency in North Down, we saw businesses that have been repurposing and looking at alternative markets. And I think this is where Invest NI needs to come in, and we do appreciate the work it has been done. We saw the evidence last week.
Yes.
And the positive feedback there was. But things have moved on, and we need to see Invest NI perhaps looking more at supporting existing businesses. And we don't want to be waking up in the morning and hear a bad news story about a loss of jobs and negativity that the government, as we're all included in, have done little or nothing to support them. So again, your feedback on those issues would be appreciated.
Okay, that's quite a list. Can we start first of all about the issue of health and the economy? I have never seen this as an issue of health versus the economy. I think we need to tackle both of the issues. So therefore, we are in exceptional circumstances never experienced before, and we need to work together to ensure that we are dealing with the virus, that we're dealing with the pandemic, but also that we are trying to keep our economy functioning and running. Again, I'm reiterating it again because it is such an important message today. We cannot afford another lockdown. It would be disastrous for the Northern Ireland economy and for those firms and that hotel that we visited last week in your constituency, and which I'll be out and about in other constituencies visiting this week. It is absolutely important that we keep the economy functioning. And therefore, while we hear a lot about health, the economic message is equally important. And I keep emphasising that at the executive because I think that is a hugely important message. It's also important to say in this situation that for those businesses who have opened up, it is equally important that we ensure that both employees and customers are safe in their working environment. And that is a duty on the business. And I have been to many businesses now over the last number of weeks. And I am absolutely impressed by the level of work and effort that has gone in to make sure that people are safe. And that is equally important. This virus can go anywhere, travel anywhere, and it's very difficult to deal with. And it's equally difficult for businesses who are trying to keep people safe and trying to keep an open economy. And I think we acknowledge the difficulties in that. But it is their legal duty to make sure that people are safe. In terms of the high street, again, I accept this. This is an issue that is largely taken forward by the Department for Communities. And I know that the Minister there has been very proactive in dealing with the issue. The First and Deputy First Minister have established the High Street Task Force. And I acknowledge that for some areas of Northern Ireland, particularly with the working from home message, the city centre in Belfast and larger towns have been quite adversely impacted by that message. And therefore, you're right, coming up to Christmas, I think that we all need to look at the kind of measures that we would maybe need to put in place to try and encourage people to get out and about within the high street and support our local shops. Having said that, while Belfast City Centre and other city centres have experienced extreme difficulties because of the working from home message, other smaller local towns have had an uptake in their high street. But recently I was up in Cookstown and I met the local chamber in Cookstown in Magherafelt. And the most interesting conversation that we had, we spent way longer than I intended to spend, because a hugely interesting conversation with local retailers, some of whom had an online presence. Their online presence wasn't to replace their high street presence. That's not their intention. But their online presence sustained their high street presence. And one particular retailer in that group, who had 2 shops in 2 different towns in the area, said that 30 to 35% of his business was now conducted online. he was still maintaining his shops. They were his window dressing, they were the things that he did. They were important for him, his family, had these for generations in the family. But that is how he was sustaining his business, and particularly during lockdown. And I have asked Invest NI, and that is why we looked at the digital capability grant. Now, so far, that is a relatively small grant for just around £1 million. And the stipulation around that is 10 employees or more. That's due to close. The applications for that grant are due to close on the 6th of October, I think, or the first week in October. Don't quote me or hang me out if it's not the 6th, but it's the first week in October. And I will be watching that very, very carefully to see if there are further interventions for our high street and our retailers that we can make that will help make them sustainable. Not encourage them to go off the high street, but make them sustainable in their businesses. And actually, this was an idea that came to me, first of all, by my own local chamber in Portadown. You know, I would like to see us try to roll out more of those type of interventions that help with business sustainability. In terms of tourism, and very apt, Gordon, because I'm going to address the Northern Ireland Tourism Alliance just after we finish here. It's their annual general meeting. Tourism has had a pretty torrid time. If you tourism, and I'll take tourism and hospitality as a broad sector. For months, they were not able to open, and they've had a hugely, hugely difficult time. I think the summer, for some elements of the industry, was a reasonable summer, where many people were encouraged to go on staycations. I myself stayed a couple of times up on the north coast in self-catering accommodation. And at times that was actually quite difficult to find on the north coast over the summer. So but having said that, you know, the autumn and the winter for hotels, for hospitality and so on, without big conferences or larger events, will again become an absolutely crucial and critical time, and we need to see sustainability for them. And that is why in the bids that I have made, a significant proportion of that is around tourism, and in, you know, creating demand for the sector, or supporting the sector in various ways. It wouldn't be proper to go through them individually, but that is where it is. I would like to see those come out because I don't want to see them come too late and miss the autumn season for the sector. So we have submitted significant bids around the tourism and hospitality sector. In relation to FDI, I am encouraged that despite all of the global difficulties that the virus has given us, that there are still plenty of firms who want to talk to us and create and invest in Northern Ireland and create job opportunities. And I'm looking forward to making some positive announcements in relation to that. And I'm also looking forward to getting back out and travelling again, particularly to North America, to support the efforts of Invest NI and our offices out there, and help talk to companies about the place that Northern Ireland is to come and invest and live and work. I recently talked to the managing director of a company from North America that has invested here in Belfast. Absolutely delighted by the level of work, skills, commitment, productivity that he has had from his workforce in Belfast, and a wonderful, wonderful ambassador for Northern Ireland. I would like to think, as Northern Ireland enters its centenary year, that we can do something in that year to highlight the skills and the place that Northern Ireland is to invest. Manufacturing repurposing, I promise I'll finish with this, folks. Manufacturing repurposing and Invest NI, will try to put them together. I was delighted to go to Denroy with you last week to see how a company has reinvented some of the things that it is doing to actually meet the challenges of the situation
that we now find ourselves in. They, of course, are working with Invest NI. It was also good to go to Priory Packaging and actually to hear, because sometimes we talk about Invest NI only in relation to foreign direct investment, but they were talking about Invest NI in relation to the future direction of their businesses, the courses that they undertook and the challenges that they got in relation to that. And it was really interesting for me to hear it firsthand from businesses how those things had worked for them. I think I'll leave it there. I've talked.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair.
And we have half an hour left, so
well.
we'll try and get everybody in. So,
Minister, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for the broad topic of how you and the department are tackling the whole issue of COVID recovery from an economic perspective. The Department of Economy, sometimes described as the Department of Everything because you have such a broad remit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a number of questions. I'll put them all out at once. And they cover a broad range of those areas of responsibility. Minister, first of all, have you asked the Permanent Secretary to reflect on what were, I think, described as fairly offensive remarks that he made the last time he was at the committee about small businesses, small business enterprises, and particularly those who were excluded? And perhaps not only you, but he might want to reflect on those comments that were made at this committee and offended very many people in the business community across Northern Ireland. Secondly, Minister, to ask you to reflect on something. During the summer, you made a very clear statement about encouraging people to return to city offices and civil servants to return. Given that the message of the Northern Ireland Executive has never changed, which is if you can work at home, you should work at home, and that was very forcibly re-emphasised yesterday. Have you reflected on your view, and do you now agree that if people can work at home, that's exactly where they should be? Turning to the broader issue of the economy, a number of years ago, your department, or preceding department prior to you becoming minister, and the executive sought to encourage the exploration for petroleum and gas, either through petroleum licences and fracking across Northern Ireland. Given the current circumstances and the urgent need to develop a green economy here in Northern Ireland, will the department now set its face against petroleum and carbon extraction processes across Northern Ireland, and will you confirm your support for a continuation of a no fracking ban here in Northern Ireland, and that what we should be doing is developing a green alternative economy to that? Again, turning to the specific issue of job losses, Minister, the committee received a briefing a number of weeks ago with regards to a very important tourism take here in Northern Ireland, that the amazing visitor centre at HMS Caroline. Concerning reports are that jobs are going to be lost there as a result of a number of issues, not least of all the number of visitors to the city, but also internal issues with the delivery of the HMS Caroline tourism promotion here in Belfast. Can you give us an update on what the department is doing with respect to that? Minister, you made reference to the value of the charter mark, and certainly it comes up on my social media feed regularly. But I have to say that feedback that I received from some visitors that were on the North Coast this weekend were that restaurants that were displaying and other places that were displaying the charter mark were not really any different from other places that they were in, and indeed one large restaurant on the North Coast seemed to be particularly poor in respect of staff wearing masks or face shields. Yet you can go to small cafes and shops in other places and people are very particular. And they don't have the charter mark, but those that subscribe to the charter mark perhaps seem to think that they can get away with more. Just very briefly, turning on to two final questions. One is, what activity are you undertaking with the Communities Minister with regards to the Kickstart programme? Because we've not only had a substantial time lag since the Chancellor announced the Kickstart programme for the rest of the United Kingdom, but it seems that it's disappeared down a black hole here in Northern Ireland. It does require your cooperation with another minister. Minister, thank you very much for the opportunity. Sorry, that's a broad range of questions. Just one final one. Have you actually made a bid to the Executive to attempt to draw down funds to include the excluded?
Okay, that's quite a list.
It is.
Almost a half hour.
Maybe you can be brief in response, Minister.
Right,
We can
okay,
try and get many other members in as well, because I'm sure
right.
they have questions too.
Right, okay. I will allow Mike to reflect on his own
Good.
comments. Okay, so that's the start. I'm pretty sure that no one intended offence at any of these things. And I do realise, and I'm not immune from this, because I run the department. I know people who have had very, very difficult circumstances to deal with.
I appreciate
No
the
one is
acknowledgement.
immune from this. I think we all feel that situation, but we have to work at times with what we have. So, but I'll allow that to be reflected as well. For those, my issues around working from home, I did write to the head of the civil service, absolutely well known, publicised and leaked to the local papers.
Not by us.
No, well, I have no idea, but anyway. Because I do believe that in many instances, being in the workplace is better for firms and better for individuals and better for the local economy of that particular area. We currently have, and it was re-emphasised last night, that those who can work from home should work from home. I have never gone against the health advice, and I respect that health advice. However, I would have to say that I talk to many firms across Northern Ireland, and many of the firms in Belfast about the workplace and returning to the office. And many of them report that they have employees who would like to go back to the office. They miss the social aspect of work. It's better for their mental health and their well-being that they come back into that collective and collaborative atmosphere that the office has for them. And many of them are facilitating that return because of those reasons. Businesses are also reporting in many cases that, for example, those businesses that employ young people, that training and that on-site learning is really much, much more difficult at a remote location, and that many young people feel that they're not able to progress and they're not surrounded by that learning experience that work should be for them at that particular time, and that they need, in order to progress their big business and keep people coming through the business, they need to bring people back into the office for those particular reasons. Now, I'm not going to go on about it, but there are reasons to come back into the office, and there are reasons that businesses would require people to come into the office for those kind of on-site activities. Having said that, in particularly the digital sector in Northern Ireland, many of those large companies report increased productivity and have worked from home very, very well. And in fact, we are using that in many ways, that resilience of the Northern Ireland economy and the Northern Ireland workforce, to talk to businesses from outside of Northern Ireland. So I hope that answers that particular issue. It's not a simple issue, and all of these things are rarely black or white. In terms of fracking and the green economy, there are, and this committee is well known, there are applications for licences. However, none of these are going to be considered. We have commissioned some research in relation to the impacts and so on. And nothing will be considered or nothing will be done until that research is delivered and until there is any kind of clear pathway forward, either on the negative or the positive side. I must say that I am inclined to support your view on fracking, Therefore we will look at these, but we will look at them in the round. And of course, this is both cross-cutting and contentious. Any decisions on anything in this nature will be made collectively by the executive. HMS Caroline. Now, I don't intend to go into a huge amount of detail, and Mike may want to come in just very, very quickly. I'm going to just talk about two aspects, because I know that you have all had a private briefing on the financial issues around HMS Caroline, so I think it would be wrong for me to go through that in a public session. But I do want to actually address the issue around the potential job losses at HMS Caroline. There are 14 full-time equivalent staff that are employed on HMS Caroline. All but 2 of these staff are on the job retention scheme. And of course, we know that that scheme will expire on the 31st of October. Some weeks ago, I signed off on the proposal that we would cover any salaries for those staff up until the end of the closure period, because we want, when the ship reopens, to have, we don't want to go looking, we want the staff to be in place. It's a much more sensible option just to simply cover the salaries, and it's a much more cost-effective option for us to do that. So that's where that lies. They have my commitment that there will be funding to actually cover those staff and those jobs. And that there would be no need for any redundancies from my point of view on HMS Caroline. And I would encourage the NMRN to come to a speedy conclusion on this with the department, so that we can ensure that the staff are there and that they are able to be there when the ship reopens next year. In terms of promotion, we all know that visitor attractions only become viable when they have sufficient numbers of visitors who are actually going there, buying the ticket and seeing the attraction. And that has been a consistent problem for HMS Caroline over the last number of years. I am hoping that we will get an operators agreement that will look at all of those issues in the round and take forward the HMS Caroline project, so that the ship can remain in Belfast, remain open and remain viable, most importantly, and not be a cost to the taxpayer. So that's the HMS Caroline issue. And if there are any other briefings you want on, I'm really happy to provide them.
Thank you.
Really very happy.
Minister, do you mind if I say something on HMS
Yes,
Caroline?
of course.
I think it's important to remember HMR. No, this is as I understand it. I'm no expert in this area. As I understand it, this is in effect a very, very large museum piece. And there's lots of public benefit reasons for museum pieces over and above visitor attractions. You know, we don't build museums to attract out-of-state visitors. So there is a certain public benefit in maintaining things of historic value for the future. And operating it as a visitor attraction is a means of helping pay and maintain that without the same recourse to the public purse. So it's important to remember that it's not just, these things are not just visitor attractions, they're in some way linked to history and museums and so forth. And that's a different public policy benefit. It's just that it's one that is trying to be covered by the income from visitors.
I think that is a really important thing for us all to remember, that many of us need to and it's important for heritage and culture. So we are where we are. We're working through the issues, and I want to get it sorted out as quickly as possible. The charter mark, I was really quite keen for the charter mark, good to go, because I felt that it might give people confidence in going out into the hospitality sector. If you're telling me that it is not working, then I will investigate that, and I will speak to Tourism NI about that, who run the scheme, because there is not much point in having it if it's not appropriately applied. Bottom line. Kickstart, I absolutely agree with you around Kickstart. I think it would be an important contribution to young people in Northern Ireland. I am absolutely committed, and this is one of the aspects of this department that I enjoy the most, is talking to, working with young people, trying to figure out pathways and guidance and ways forward. So I do agree with you. I understand from the Finance Minister that they're trying to work out if there are any Barnett consequentials from the Kickstart announcement. And I also have spoken personally to the Communities Minister, offered her the cooperation of my department, because Kickstart is really an employment scheme as opposed to a training scheme, which would be this department's. But if she, for example, wanted to have a bespoke scheme for Northern Ireland, which was just more than 6 months employment, then absolutely keen, happy and willing to work together to make sure that that happens.
The frustration, Minister, out there is that it is existing in the rest of the United Kingdom and it's not existing here at the moment. And while, yes, you can always add value to a scheme, the reality is that my inbox is filling up with provider-type organisations who are very keen to deliver this and are totally frustrated by not being able to.
I do understand from Carol, to be absolutely fair, that she is doing the scoping out for the scheme. Sometimes when schemes are announced at a UK level like that, you know, we do need a few weeks to make sure that it is proper. And I do understand from her that, and I've spoken to her personally about it, that her officials are doing the scoping out for the scheme and that it is there.
And just to back that up, our skills team are working closely with the folks in DFC, and I have been personally at some of those meetings where they've given a briefing of how they think the Kickstart scheme might pan out, but obviously I don't want to go into any of the detail, because in due course I imagine that will be unveiled by the executive and the Communities Minister.
Just transfers across from what's happening in the rest of the UK. Why weren't you following what was happening up to the announcement?
Sorry, Chair, the Minister's time is limited. I think in fairness, Stuart's had a crack at it.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Gary.
Thanks, Chair. I'm conscious that there's now 7 minutes, and I did joke about 30 minutes been gone, but we nearly are 30 minutes gone. In terms of, Minister, you've obviously highlighted the priority being trying to avoid another lockdown, and we completely agree with that, and the onus is on all of us to ensure that doesn't happen. The 32 bids that are currently with the Finance Minister, and you have indicated that there are pressures to ensure that that money is spent before at the end of the financial year, but also beyond that, you know, these are vital interventions that we need to restart our economy and to secure a lot of the jobs and the presence that we have. Could you maybe give an indication, Minister, about, you know, how important they are in terms of the time scale, and maybe are there any particular ones that are at risk if there's not a decision taken as soon as possible?
So yes, absolutely. The bids are around assistance to business, skills and youth training, tourism, energy, research and development, support, further support for tourism, and support for the creative industries, areas where there are extreme difficulties in the economy. The bids are, the money is an in-year bid, so there is, when these are announced, then the department will simply then have to work up the scheme and get that scheme up, running and out and into the appropriate areas. And that's why it's really, really important to get the bids and the whole thing through as quickly as possible. And I really do stress that this is an important part of what we're doing. Can I say also really about the bids? Some of the bids also, like the apprenticeship, now to be fair, again, and I think that it is important to say that we did get the piece of money for the apprenticeship recovery schemes ahead of the other bids, because I was stressed to the Finance Minister that at a time when young people are making their choices at the end of when they got the results, etc., and firms and young people needed to know that this was available to them. So we did get that money ahead of the other bids. But in those bids, in terms of skills and training, you know, we're looking, for example, to have all-age apprenticeships. I really, really do believe that we should be able to retrain, restart at any stage of our lives. I've done it often enough myself. I really believe that that opportunity should be there. And, you know, we have all age apprenticeships for the higher level apprenticeship. I want to make sure that that's available to young people and to older folk coming out. It seemed a little bit strange to me that if you were 27, 28, I had one case where a young lad had joined the army, came out of the army 27, 28 and was told he was too old to be an apprentice. That seemed utterly wrong. So I want to look at that. So we want to look at that. And some of the bids will also have financial implications, as Mike said, in further years. Because, for example, to support our apprentices right through to the end of their apprenticeship, we will need that money in further years. And I would welcome the support of the committee, because these are really important for young people and important as we try to get through at a very, very difficult period.
Thanks for that. I'm not going to take up any more time, other than I think it is important that as a committee we do support that. Unfortunately, we're not getting to delve into a lot of these issues because we've spent so much time dealing with political platitudes, to be perfectly honest. And I think we do need to start to drill down and address these key areas. But thanks for that. I think we'll pick up at a later date.
Thanks, Guy. Don, Dai.
Thank you. Minister, I get the impression that you're not in tune with the Executive's message, which was delivered yesterday by the Health Minister and the First and Deputy First Minister around the restrictions that have been introduced. That your view would be that the economy has to run no matter what, and that the restrictions are damaging the economy. Am I wrong?
John, I think one of the things you will find all through this, that I have never contravened or run against the health message that the professionals like Michael McBride have given, people who have spent their entire lives trying to keep the public safe. I am simply doing my job and saying that the difficulties for businesses, if there were a total lockdown, would be absolutely enormous. I didn't hear anything different from the First Minister on that last night. Indeed, I didn't hear anything different from the Deputy First Minister on that last night. I think they are all cognizant of the fact that restrictions on business and lockdowns would be absolutely devastating for the Northern Ireland economy. So I'm not out of tune with anybody. I'm simply doing my job of warning that we are in very, very difficult and serious circumstances. But the opportunity is there. And I think, again, both Arlene and Michelle last night actually indicated that. The opportunity is there for us to reverse where we are now and to take the action that we need to take now to make sure that business can operate into the future in the way that it should.
Would you agree with me, though, that there is also a responsibility on certain sections of business, and particularly in those shops that don't enforce the wearing of face masks? Mm-hmm. Those businesses that have allowed the social distancing to lax and to lapse. So that there is a responsibility on business to ensure we don't go into lockdown as well and enforce the measures that are in place. And just finally, you mentioned the High Street Task Force announced on the 7th of August. Why is it not met?
Right, so first of all, the High Street Task Force is an initiative by TEO, by the First and Deputy First Ministers. So if you want to, I would address that query to them. I think it is a critical piece of work. I've already indicated my fears around the High Street and the small businesses, whether it's through working from home or whatever. I've also indicated some of the things that I think that we can do in the Department of the Economy to help sustainability. You raise a really important question around retail and social distancing. It is important to have social distancing in our retail outlets, but it's also equally difficult to ask retailers to take on an enforcement issue that for them would be very, very difficult. So what I would really appeal to folk, anyone who happens to pick up this conversation, really need to remember the rules: hand hygiene, social distancing, wear the face mask. That way we'll keep ourselves safe, we'll keep others safe, and we'll keep businesses operating.
Well, I think it is difficult for business.
Yeah.
If I walk into a shop and I'm smoking, I'll be asked to put the cigarette out. If I walk into a shop with a dog, other than a gay dog, I'll be asked to leave. So I think we have to get into the mindset that if you're breaking public health regulations, you have to be asked not to do it.
Exactly.
To be fair, I think that the further enforcement of guidelines will be to get to enforcement of guidelines. I just think there is a difficulty for retailers in expecting them to do the enforcement. What I would say that is we can do it collectively, we can do it ourselves, and we don't need to get into that position.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. John Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'll be quick because we are at time again, and as one of the last speakers pushed for time with you. I appreciate you going in 5 minutes. You rightly point out in the Rebuilding a Stronger Economy document, which is a strong short and medium term strategy for rebuilding the economy post-COVID, of the need for programmes and interventions to rebuild the economy. And we've heard of the 32 bids to date that your department, through you, have submitted to the executive for approval. Some of those, like I say, are short-term strategies with skills and apprenticeships, and all welcomed. But surely you, like myself, will agree that part of the first part of economic recovery begins with keeping what we've got. And if we accept that the Northern Ireland economy is predicated upon 90% roughly of that backbone of the economy is micro and small, medium-sized enterprises, and that it's easier and more cost-effective to keep those going than to fund programmes to get new businesses started, how is that not integral to economic recovery? And therefore, if the 32 bids identified by you and your department have been submitted to the economy for economic recovery, how is it not the remit of you and your department to identify a bid to support businesses that are currently trading, have not been able to access support, and therefore cannot get their hands on that money?
I don't want to take up time by reiterating the whole process around the grant scheme, but I don't see the two things as mutually exclusive.
I do.
In every part of our lives, including the economy, we have to rework, reinvent and take things forward. So I don't see the two things as mutually exclusive. So I don't see that supporting FDI should be set against supporting SMEs in Northern Ireland. And you will recall that the 10,000 grant supported around about, Mike will probably keep me right, about 27,000 small businesses and small manufacturing businesses in Northern Ireland at a time when things were very, very difficult. I don't see that there is that the two things cannot operate together. And Mike might want to
that's right, Minister. So the £10,000 scheme assisted just around 25,000 small businesses, and the 25k scheme assisted just under 3,000. And then there were further 5,000 companies assisted under the Micro Business Hardship Fund as well.
At no stage did I say they are. My point is that if you've identified bids that are key to economic rebuilding, how is supporting the businesses that already exist not part of that? And therefore, how is it not the requirement of the department to identify that? We've covered the ground that now, thankfully, on the back of the unanimous decision by the Assembly last week to call for that support, that your officials are going to go away and talk to the colleagues, long overdue in my opinion, in Wales and Scotland. But I made the point in that chamber debate that if the key need here is hardship, surely that can be demonstrated by the businesses themselves. Why can that not be something that can be put together very quickly by your department and a bid put to the minister, to the economy or to the finance minister? He replied to a letter to myself and Steve Aiken 2 days ago that he is willing and would welcome any bid from the department for sole traders and sectors benefiting little from schemes to date. Again, Minister, can I implore you to go back and do that? And just further to the discussion that we had with Richard Ramsey last week, he identified that many people who unfortunately would be losing their jobs during this would be looking to open themselves as micro businesses using those key skills. For example, what we'd seen at Nortel previously with telecoms industry actually boomed with micro businesses on the back of that closure. They require startup schemes. Is there anything in your plans to help new businesses through Enterprise NI and other startup business programmes that we can actually get these businesses up and running whenever that time comes?
Okay.
Prime Minister, I was just going to make a point. the reference was made to learning from experiences in Scotland and Wales in terms of constructing these schemes. One of the things that we've just been made aware of in recent days from colleagues in Wales is that from their scheme there's a significant concern around fraud and error. So, there are issues like that we need to learn from before we construct and rush to put a scheme in place.
It's just a pity this taken 12 weeks.
I would also have to say one of the things that is important to remember, the Finance Minister has set aside money for taxis, haulage, etc. So far he hasn't received a bid. There is no problem in allocating the money, even though the bid hasn't been made.
Claire, Claire into the spotlight, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Minister. I'll try and be very, very quick because I know you are keen to get to your next meeting. You had mentioned the energy strategy, but I understand that that's not due to be published until towards the end of the year next year. I understand that we've also far exceeded our renewable energy targets. Is there any idea or consideration in the interim that we might increase those energy targets whilst we're anticipating a strategy, just to try and stimulate that investment, give some of the businesses in the industry something to work to, and maybe in itself create jobs? Are we looking at other opportunities throughout your remit to try and provide opportunities and jobs that maybe wouldn't necessarily be linked to the current issues around COVID? Quickly as well, I want to come back to I suppose it's Sinead's comments around targets and programme for government. Can I assume that we have less than 2 years left in the mandate, that we're not expecting a programme for government, and are we just working off whatever the department had in their bag before the executive got back up and running? And also I just want to point to the comments that Mike Brennan just referred to in relation to fraud. I don't think we shouldn't help people because there's a chance that some people might behave bad. If that was the case, then we wouldn't ever develop any government programme. So I would ask you to reflect on those comments, and let's not assume that all those people who haven't received help up until now are actually going to behave badly around any support they might get, at the last minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I fully accept that worries around error or fraud would not preclude us from doing any kind of scheme. I think that most people will recognise that at very, very short notice we provided schemes for the general business community, which have helped tens of thousands of businesses, and those schemes were schemes that probably might have taken months and months on end, were implemented within weeks, and I pay tribute to the staff in the department for the work that they've done on that. In relation to the programme for government, no, I don't think anybody should be just pulling something out of their back pocket and saying, here's one, it'll do fine. The executive, having been hugely distracted by COVID in the very, very early months of its existence, is going to provide and work on, we already have a draft programme for government that was within the earlier part of the mandate, and will be working on that to make sure that there is a proper assessed outcomes-based programme for government for Northern Ireland. In relation to energy, and I'll allow Mike or Shane to come in this, because this is an exciting element of the department. It's actually an important part of the bids that we are making to the department, and an important part of the money that we're trying to reorientate even within the Department of the Economy. It is amazing in Northern Ireland that 48% of our electricity comes from renewable sources. And I think that is a huge tribute to the sector in Northern Ireland. And I want to increase the value of renewable energy, both to the environment but also to the economy of Northern Ireland. And we are working on some very exciting projects in relation to hydrogen, and it would be useful and perhaps we will be able to brief you in the days ahead around those projects. And I think that there is huge potential in that sector, not just in the decarbonising agenda, but also in creating jobs for people in Northern Ireland. And I will ask Mike or Shane to come in on the timetable for the energy strategy, because this is one of the key and important pieces of work that we will take forward. There are many things that you can do in the short period left to this executive, and one of them will be to lay the pathway for an energy strategy that meets our commitments to zero carbon, but also our commitments to a greener economy and a better start within our economy.
Okay,
Mike, do you want to come in
on the renewables point, just to stress that we have already exceeded the target that the previous PFG set of 40%. So renewable energy coming onto the system isn't being constrained back. As the Minister said, it's currently sitting at 48%, which is a remarkable achievement. So work isn't just paused, waiting the delivery of a new energy strategy in September next year. There are lots of initiatives that we're pursuing very, very aggressively, and Ministers made reference to the hydrogen initiative. But there are other initiatives that we're looking at that will actually encourage the greater uptake of for example, wind electricity generation, because there are some significant opportunities in the use of batteries, for example, to store renewable wind generation that isn't used at night time. That then feeds into opportunities in the production of electrolyzers that could possibly generate many hundreds of jobs, and then also on the use of hydrogen on a vast array of public services, for example NI Water or TransLink. So there's a raft of things happening in the energy space. It's not as if everything's just waiting for the miraculous appearance of an energy strategy in September next year. All these things are happening at pace. The Department has appointed a panel of independent experts to advise us on the construction of where we go with this. So if the committee thought it was useful, we could even bring the people from the Energy Strategy Group along to talk you through what's going on in this space as we speak. Okay.
Just, there was a point made earlier about long-term planning and doing things for the long term. I think I remember back off the top of my head, 10 or 12 years ago, renewable energy from electricity was sitting about 8%. When the energy strategy came out with the 40%, that looked like something that very few folks believed could be achieved. But that is the benefit of having a strategy and implementing the strategy, that you can look back after 10 years and see that you've actually made an impact. And so, getting the strategy right is hugely important, and sticking to it and implementing it. That's not just important for the energy strategy, it's not just important for the skills strategy, it'll also be important for the forthcoming economic strategy.
Okay, thank you.
I take all that, and I appreciate the department has continued to work in that in anticipation of a strategy, but that strategy is a year away from now. My point was around the target. You have, congratulations, you've exceeded your target by 8%. So why don't we be more ambitious in the meanwhile and extend that target to maybe something more higher? Because that in itself might bring new opportunities and investment, from my understanding, speaking with the industry. I'm not disputing what you've done. I'm just saying let's be a wee bit more ambitious, given that you have been so successful in meeting your target.
Minister, I know you have to go. So
I do. I do apologise. I'm up for increasing targets and putting pressure on people to work, but we'd have to take the advice of the experts in the field to see what's possible in relation to the setting of those targets. But certainly it's a conversation worth having. But I do think also that the sector has performed well in many respects, and we need the roadmap and the pathway to get it to that place, but not sitting back and waiting for the miraculous appearance of a strategy, getting on with some of the stuff that we want to do anyway. And I am excited by some of the prospects that we have. And I will be speaking to Kwasi Kwarteng this week again around the impact of hydrogen in the economy and bids that we can make and support that we would like to see at a UK level for that as well. So it's really quite good. I do apologise. I was to have a meeting at 11:30.
Second, and then if the Minister wants to go ahead and leave. And thank you for your time, and I'm sure you'll be back with us soon. Michael, just some comments were directed at yourself, and
Yep.
I'd like to offer you the right to reply to them if
Thank
you
you,
wish
Chair.
to do that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So obviously, after the last appearance of the committee, I revisited Hansard to see, what was drawing all this attention. And I've looked closely at Hansard, and the point I was making, and I probably should have been more eloquent, but the point I was making was that the executive has spent £340 billion assisting 30,000 businesses. There's roughly another 90,000 commercial entities out in Northern Ireland, right, that haven't been supported to date. The executive only has £120 million left to spend the remainder of this year. So how it uses that money and how we construct bids has to be carefully put together to make sure that it gets the maximises the positive returns from that. And as I say, that's what Hansard said. Now, I've received some correspondence from some individuals who are quoting things that wasn't actually said in Hansard.
Chair, if it's helpful, we will tweet out that Hansard in the committee so that it's more widely available.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Shane.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on then. I think Aidan is in the meeting already. Can we bring Aidan into the spotlight, please? Yes. So moving on then to our briefing from the Brexit Working Group. There's a clerk's memo at page 80, the notice of amendments to the UK Internal Market Bill at page 88, a House of Commons Library paper on statistics on UK-Ireland trade at page 110, a HMRC paper on trade and goods in the UK regions at page 128, NISRA infographic providing an overview of trade at page 135, and then there was a NISRA paper at page 136. So I'd like to welcome Aidan Conley, representing the NI Business Brexit Working Group. I don't know why I can't say that. And I'm going to hand straight over to Aidan, and apologies, Aidan, for keeping you waiting there for a few minutes. If you want to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members.
Okay, certainly. Thank you very much for having me. And yes, I agree. We need a better acronym or a better name for the group. Before I start into the evidence, can I put on record my best wishes to Assembly Member Stalford and wish him a speedy recovery. On the internal market bill, firstly, the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, we're a loose sort of conglomeration of a lot of trade bodies and business representative bodies. But we came together, it was December last year, and we came together with a very simple purpose, and that purpose was to get the best possible outcome out of the protocol and out of the joint committee negotiations. If we look at the UK Internal Market Bill, there's two sides to this coin. The first one is that a UK Internal Market Bill and an Act is needed, and the two principles of non-discrimination and mutual recognition are welcome, they're laudable, and they are needed, especially if you look, for example, for ensuring NI goods can continue to be part of UK-wide schemes, and I'm thinking particularly about our agri-food sector and the Red Tractor scheme and that sort of quality assurance, which is hugely beneficial to NI agri-food. That under clause 41 that precludes new checks and controls NI to GB. However, it doesn't do what it needs to do, in my opinion. It gives explicit duties for all public bodies to approach each question about the protocol with the explicit aim of protecting the UK internal market and NI's place in it, and the power to the UK government to breach the protocol with regards to moving goods NI to GB. Now, that's prima facie a good thing. But it breaks the protocol and by extension the withdrawal agreement, and it raises serious questions about things like WTO compliance, as well as possible issues about fraud, smuggling, tax evasion. And also more serious for the EU side is the clauses within the Internal Market Bill where the UK government claims powers that basically ride roughshod over the state aid commitments that are within the protocol. The EU would then be worried that there's a potential of NI being a backdoor for dumping unfairly subsidised goods, or for companies to have an unfair subsidy regime. Which, you know, while highly unlikely given the current government's ideas on subsidisation, it is a worry for them. And all of these things are actionable in law. And for the business community, you can't build a business model on something that is actionable. You wouldn't buy a house that had legal arguments on it, or that you had no guarantee of a right of way, or your right of way could be actionable in court. So in the same way, business models can't be built where there is uncertainty, and that's what we have always looked for as far as the Business Brexit Working Group is we're looking for clarity, but we're also looking for a bit of sanity as well. It has to make sense. I think we also need to make clear about what the bill doesn't do, and that's it doesn't legislate for movement of goods from GB to NI. There's been a lot of political posturing about this, which is unhelpful to us in the business community. We want certainty, we want trust, and we want clarity so we can prepare for the end of the transition period. There's been political posturing about the need for legislation for GB to NI to prevent a blockade on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. So I want to put that speculation to bed, because it's completely unhelpful of where we are. This bill does not touch on Great Britain to Northern Ireland goods movement. There's a provision under the protocol, under Article 16 and Annex 7, to allow the UK to circumvent the problem and keep NI stocked. The third country listing problem is simply not being done on the other side. Both sides have to declare to each other what their standards are going to be on the 1st of January 2021. This is a paperwork process that hasn't been concluded yet. So if you spuriously say the EU could block goods coming into NI, then in the same way you could say that the UK could block goods coming into the UK, as they haven't they haven't listed the EU as a third country yet. So, you know, this has been blown out of proportion, and what we need is to concentrate on the facts. What we need to concentrate on remove the politics and look at the process. Also, speaking to the EU, they've said they will not, would not, and haven't contemplated such a blockade. So I really want to put that to bed today. Yet again, is another occasion where politics and media is taking over the process, when what we need is cool heads, we need dialogue, and we need, most of all, trust. As far as the Business Brexit Working Group is concerned, we have three principles on this discussion. The first is that the NI protocol is not perfect. However, it does avert some of the worst consequences of a chaotic, non-negotiated no deal. And what we have been doing since we were incepted last December is we've been working with the UK government, we've been working with the EU, we've been working with anyone that we can influence or has influence to remove frictions and get facilitations to get the protocol to work better for Northern Ireland. The second principle that we have is that the time scale that we now have for business to be ready for the 1st of January is nigh on impossible. Business simply does not have the bandwidth nor the financial capacity to deal with huge amounts of changes, as well as the ongoing epidemic, or pandemic, I should say. And for us, there's a need to be really clear that the last sort of the principle is that we need the EU and the UK to conclude as comprehensive a trade deal as possible, and that will remove frictions and therefore remove costs, not only for Northern Ireland business, but for households as well. You got to remember, as I often quote, Northern Ireland households have half the discretionary income of Great British households. At the last update, the numbers were at the discretionary income, by the way, is that income which is left after you've all your big bills, your mortgage or your rent and all that sort of thing paid. For Northern Ireland, we have £119 per household per week. The GB average is £215, so we're about half, and that means that we can't afford these cost rises. That means we need friction. So the only show in town for Northern Ireland business is that the EU and the UK get a free trade agreement, zero tariffs, zero quotas, and build on that. You know, there's other things like security and safety, veterinary agreements that could come from it, but we do need a deal. And then the other point is that the Joint Committee need to give some common sense decisions. All this needs to happen within a very quick time frame. Quite simply, we need to have that certainty, that sanity, and that ability to prepare, and the clock is ticking.
Thank you very much, Aidan. That was really useful, and it was really useful to cover some of those, I suppose, fallacies that have been put out there as well. Just to pick up on in relation to the mutual recognition and non-discrimination, I guess there has been some concern raised that there could be regulation downwards as well that potentially impacts on protocol commitments. While it's a good thing to be able to ensure that non-discrimination of goods from here and into the British market, that potentially into the future that could be a difficulty as well.
So my understanding, there's two ways to look at this. The understanding as far as protecting Northern Ireland consumers is that we will be administering the EU single market, and that means that, you know, these things like hormone beef and chlorinated chicken and that sort of thing won't be able to come in anyway. And there hasn't been anything that we've seen either in this bill or that we've heard from the UK government that says that there's anything about setting aside those rules. So, you know, de jure, we're still part of the UK and those rules, but de facto we'll be administering the EU single market rules. The problem then is for our agri-food sector here, and if there is a race to the bottom over in GB, then they will be competing with those lower standards and with that sort of, like I said, a race to the bottom. I'm not convinced that is going to happen. It is a worry. And it is something that, you know, we have to be very, very clear here that this has to be sustainable. Whatever comes out of the Joint Committee and whatever the FTA that eventually comes from the EU and the UK has to be sustainable. And for us, that means that there has to be a recognition that we need some sort of agreement on standards.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I suppose that brings me to my next point about what is still outstanding in terms of things that need resolved through the Joint Committee and where all of the efforts at this point should be focused, and in trying to achieve that comprehensive trade deal at the end of the year, because I think we all recognise the protocol is flawed and the best way is to have as best a trade deal as possible. So what and how quickly can it be done in your view?
Well, it's funny you should ask that because, as you might remember, the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group brought out a response to the UK command paper. And in that response, we set out 67 questions that needed to be fulfilled, needed to be answered for businesses before the 1st of January. Now, so far, we have about 60 still outstanding that still need to be answered. And on top of that, there is a lot more that have come in, things like labelling and other issues that have raised their heads in the meantime. We are currently rewriting that paper. I hope to have it done by the end of the week. The Business Brexit Working Group, it's a huge group effort, and we're trying to make sure that no sector is left behind and that everybody has input in it. So what we're trying to do is to have that paper ready again. And to be honest, there's going to be a lot of questions and a very short space of time to get them answered. A lot of it will go away if we get that zero tariff, zero quota FTA, because it removes the custom stuff. There's other things such as SPS and products of animal origin, labelling, VAT, that still need to be answered, and those are still going to be huge problems. As far as the likelihood of an FTA, well, I wouldn't be picking my lottery numbers this evening because you're in the same sort of ballpark. I still think it's very, very possible. Talking to both sides recently, it's very clear that once the sticking problems of a level playing field, of the state aid and of fisheries are finished, then something can be cobbled together quite quickly. I think those sticking points are still huge mountains to climb, but once those are out of the way, if we're able to get those out of the way, then a deal can be forthcoming quite quickly.
And Aidan, in relation to the the likes of the VAT regime and the timescales to be able to get something set up and implemented for the beginning of January, which is unrealistic at this point, is there an ask around without using the transition period term, but a transition from the transition period?
So I have to be very clear here that that is not something that we have agreed as the Business Brexit Working Group. So I'm taking that hat off for a second. But in my own capacity as the Retail Consortium Director, anything that allows for an adjustment period, for the transition period, we can't use the word extension, but if there was a way for us to have an ability to embed these changes over a period of time, that would be very useful. I'll give you one quick example. Labelling. Usually if we were to change labels on things for the 1st of January, that would be signed off by the end of August. So we're already past that deadline. Now, it can still be done, but the shorter the time span that you have to do this sort of thing, the more expensive it is. So even within retail, we're a very high volume, low profit margin industry, and any of these new costs can have a severe impact on the bottom line. And again, I'll go back to the Northern Ireland consumer. They can't afford to have cost rises that are caused by these rises in costs and frictions either.
And just finally, from myself, in relation to businesses in the north trading to third countries through EU FTAs, has there been progress around that issue?
No, quite simply no. There are we are getting different stories from different people, and again, it's something that we have asked now. We are in contact with the Secretary of State, the Cabinet Office, but also with the EU and the Irish government on this as well. And again, it falls under those questions that have to be answered. It looks like that probably won't be possible, although I can't give a definitive answer until I get a definitive answer from the EU, and it's one of our biggest asks. I think it's important to realise, as far as our group is concerned, we are holding the EU's feet to the fire just as much as we are holding the UK government's feet to the fire. For us, this is about getting a way to have the best possible outcome, to remove friction and to keep costs down for business and for Northern Ireland households.
And even how big a problem is that not being able to access those EU FTAs?
It's all very dependent on which industry that you're talking about. It would open other markets. It also would make things a lot easier for some people who were bringing in, say, ingredients for manufacturing or components for manufacturing. However, it is a very movable feast. For some people, it's not particularly important. For others, it would be a huge lifeline and would open other markets for them. Quite simply, though, we need to try and get to a position where there is the least friction possible, both east-west and north-south, and the more that we can be involved in that, it's not that we have an integrated supply chain, we have integrated supply chains across this island. For example, even if you look at in retail, again, we buy about 2.6 billion of Northern Ireland agri-food. 60% of that goes through the Republic of Ireland to get over to GB. For us, and the business community has been hugely pragmatic about this and has been hugely forthright in saying this. It is about having no friction anywhere. Now, that's not going to happen. So what we're trying to work on is having the least friction possible.
Thank John Stewart.
Thanks, Chair, getting early this time. Aidan, thank you very much for your presentation. Can I congratulate you on your half marathon at the weekend? You're doing sterling work, I have to say. You're smashing it, so the full marathon isn't too far away of that, I've no doubt. Can I thank you and the working group for the ongoing engagement at all levels? I think it is providing a lot of good work. We just had a discussion, you maybe caught some of it, about the economic impact on businesses of COVID and just how big an impact that is having here. And no doubt, as you've said, the uncertainty around all this, no matter where anyone stands on the discussion on the rights and wrongs of it, it is having impacts on business. Could you maybe just give us some examples of maybe businesses that you're aware of that aren't investing, aren't wanting to drive forward given the uncertain climate, or actual financial impacts that the ongoing uncertainty is having on businesses?
So the financial uncertainty regarding Brexit has had a problem, has been a problem as far as investment since 2016. Quite simply, people looking at Northern Ireland, don't know how they're going to trade, where they're going to trade, and there's a very, very simple equation in all this, that if the new costs are higher than the profit margin, then either the business model or the product becomes unviable. And that's for existing industries just as much as it is for people who are looking to Northern Ireland. You've got to remember that it's not where people invest in the UK anymore. It's not even where they invest in Europe. This is a global community, a global village, and a global economy. And people will want to have that certainty before they put pen to paper on a contract. I think COVID has brought things into really stark clarity for a lot of people. One of the biggest examples I can give you is is just-in-time supply chains. What COVID has proven is that just-in-time supply chains are hugely economically efficient and they're hugely time efficient, but they're also hugely fragile. Now, at the start of this pandemic, we had people who were overbuying when they didn't have to do that, put strain on the supply chain. And the shortages and they were caused there not because we didn't have the stock, or not because we didn't have the means to get it here. It was because people were buying it far too quickly, overbuying, and that meant that we were reliant on the just-in-time supply chain not to be delayed, and we had to play catch-up. Now, if you look at what the possibilities for delays are, if a lorry misses a boat coming over to Northern Ireland, it's not just 3 hours late. If it's 20 minutes late for the boat, it's not just 20 minutes late. It's not just 3 hours late, the sailing time. It's actually 24 hours. Because for retailers, we have distribution centres. A lorry will get filled up once a day and then go out to that store. And if it misses that picking time, then it won't be on there. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking on. So there is worries about investment, both short-term and long-term investment, because people won't invest unless there's clarity. There's also worries about the supply chain that we have at the moment, and that's why all eyes and all hope is on an FTA, as well as some really common sense decisions from the Joint Committee.
Thanks, Aidan. I've just still one quick one. Allow you to take off that hat and put on another one. I have this week written an urgent question to the First and Deputy First Minister asking when the High Street Task Force will meet. It was raised with the Minister for the Economy just previous to you coming on, who said it's not her responsibility and that it is the First and Deputy First Minister's responsibility. Do you agree with me that it is disgraceful that meeting is still not met, given the massive impacts on our high streets and town centres around the country, particularly in light of the impacts that COVID have been having, and that it is essential that task force gets something done as quickly as possible?
While I can understand your frustration, I wouldn't go as far as to say disgraceful. I will sidestep the political issue. What I will say, though, is that yes, I was tweeting about that yesterday, and in fact this morning, just before I came on, I wrote to the First and Deputy First Minister asking what progress had been made in the High Streets Task Force, who was going to be on it, and when we can expect the first meeting, and I look forward to getting an answer to that. I think this is. There's huge amounts that need done. Firstly, to give people confidence to return to our high streets. It's not just about saying it, it's about proving it. It's about a partnership working, including the local councils, including the BSNI, including, everyone needs to be a part of this. But as well as that, there needs to be a realisation that there's a big difference from being able to open and being able to open profitably. And what we need is to make sure that our high streets are inviting, that they're safe, that they're accessible. Translink need to be involved, getting people to and through towns. But the big thing is that all of this has to be done safely.
Thank you very much.
Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be briefer this time than I was. Aidan, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for where you started in your comments. Basically, you tell us that we're not going to starve, and that you've rather debunked some of the scaremongers, so that's very welcome. Indeed, more of that would be welcome. That the people that you represent, the industries and the businesses that you represent, and the issues that they face in relation to Brexit, while they are difficult, costly, and all of those things, it nevertheless would be very helpful from the public's perception to understand just exactly what the impacts or lack of impacts actually will be when the day comes. What does a no deal look like to you if that's where we end up? And the second question is, in the dim distant past, perhaps it was Mrs May was Prime Minister, it might even been the current Prime Minister, but there was a clear promise to actually pay for any additional cost that might be attributed to Brexit to Northern Ireland. Has that disappeared down a black hole, or was I daydreaming at the time?
Two very good questions. Firstly, on a no deal, it really depends on it really depends on what sort of side agreements or any other agreements that are made. If it is a complete no deal, it's a difference between a paper wall being down the Irish Sea and a brick wall being down the Irish Sea. There still can be things that can be looked at through the joint committee as far as dead-end hosts. One of the things that's being talked about is a supermarket solution or a retailer solution, which basically is a certified and auditable supply chain, which people have a burden of evidence to show that it's not going to go into the EU customs territory and it's not going to go any further outside of NI. You've got to remember that retail accounts for about 70% of the value of everything that crosses the Irish Sea. So that would be very, very welcome. However, the eyes on the prize statement that I keep making is that we do need to have a deal because if we have zero tariffs, zero quotas, that removes a lot of that customs problem, and that frees time up, also removes friction, also removes cost. So the discussions that we have had with both the UK government and the EU are very much along the lines that they are continuing to push ahead to negotiate. There are a few stumbling blocks, but they want to get a deal, and that gives us a little bit more confidence. However, until I see it bread and butter signed and delivered, it's still going to be a worry. As far as the promise to pay for additional costs, we have already seen the Trader Support Service that has gone out to tender. The tender has been awarded. That does provide a short-term solution just on customs. It's very, very welcome. It doesn't do everything. It doesn't deal with VAT. Doesn't deal with SPS and export health certificates. But it is a good start. Anything that removes friction is good. But on that export health certificates, that is tens of thousands of pounds per load if you're talking about a supermarket load that is going with lots of products of animal origin on it. And there's been nothing yet. There's been intimations that maybe it could be covered by the UK government. However, we have had nothing solid. And it all goes back to this timing. The fact that we have 3 months now to get all this in place. And while there are best efforts going on with the EU to get ready on their side and the UK government to get ready on their side, we're kind of stuck in the middle here in Northern Ireland, actually waiting for that specific technical and final detail that we need to implement things. I think that in January we said it would be very hard to get everything ready for January 2021. It's going to be even harder now, and there are businesses who are asking not for detail so they know what to implement. They're looking for detail to find out whether or not they have a working business model come the 1st of January.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. John Dowd.
Thanks, Aidan. You've heard the predictions as well as anyone that we're heading, as a result of COVID and Brexit and uncertainty, to around 100,000 people unemployed by the end of the year. There's great nervousness and uncertainty for businesses, for workers, for families out there, and it's all added to by the prospect of a no-deal trade deal, or if that's a contradiction in terms. But I want to ask you a question with your other hat on in relation to the retail consortium. We could possibly be heading towards another lockdown. And the reason we'd be heading towards another lockdown is, in my opinion, because of a breakdown in the social distancing, hygiene, all those regulations that we've been putting out to people and advice we've been putting out to people for a variety of reasons has broken down. Some of them justifiable, some of them not. But I want to put it to you in terms of where the retailers are at. Unless there is an enforcement of wearing masks in shops and public areas, then I think that's going to add to the prospect of a lockdown. And then businesses will be looking at us going, you have another lockdown, why? Well, one of the reasons will be if face masks aren't, if people aren't instructed to wear face masks in shops, then that's where we're heading in that direction. Well, why are retailers so reluctant to enforce what is a public health regulation? The same as smoking, the same as dogs. I remember a few years ago, a large retailer stopped allowing people into the shop because they were wearing pyjamas. So that's maybe a quirky one, but it's for a health reason. So why are retailers so reluctant to enforce this?
Well, I haven't tried going in with my pyjamas. I don't think anyone wants to see that ever. On a more serious note, I think there's we do take our responsibilities very seriously. The retailers who, especially those food retailers and the specialised retailers who were open from the start of this pandemic have done an amazing job, and they. I've been on record both on this committee and others praising those workers who have gone above and beyond and have done a wonderful job, of which we are extremely, extremely proud. But one of the things that has happened over that period is that we have seen a rise in abuse and we have seen a rise in violence against shop staff now. That has happened at the start when it comes to things like social distancing, when it has come to stock not being in store at the particular time, when it comes to even hand sanitizer and that sort of thing. And we have seen that some people become very, very irate if they're asked to wear a mask. There's a balance here where we can, and we've said this from the outset, we can be part of the solution. We can put signage up, we can inform people. But if you're asking, if it's a small shop and you have one person working who's asking several people to put masks on, that's a situation. It's very hard to ask retailers to put their frontline colleagues in harm's way. We, of course, have our part to play. We will have the signage. There are other positions where people have very real and acceptable reasons for not wearing a mask, and there's a slight concern about a big concern about putting those sort of people on the spot to explain. So I think I totally get where we're coming from as far as where we are, and a lockdown, if a further lockdown is good for no one. I think there is a huge amount of personal responsibility here. I always wear a mask whenever I go into a shop or basically wherever I'm in an enclosed environment. We will continue to push that messaging, but what we can't do is put our frontline colleagues, some of whom are very young, into harm's way.
I'm not talking about single shopkeepers, I'm talking about large retailers.
Yeah.
We have the resources and the wherewithal to enforce this. If you're telling me, and I have heard of incidents where people were rude right down to assault, the police need to be called. Just as if I was to walk into a shop and I was smoking, and a shop worker asked me to put the cigarette out. If I refused, or if I got violent, the police should be called and the rule book should be through whoever does it. But there is no other area of public health regulations I can think of affecting a shop which is so blatantly ignored by the management and owners of large retail stores. I cannot think of any other area where they flagrantly just ignore it. So I think there has to...
Great question with saying that they flagrantly ignore it. You know, our members have spent over £7 million in Northern Ireland providing PPE, providing equipment, providing hand sanitizer, and to ensure that there is a workable number of people within.
Do you have to wear a face mask in a shop or not?
You do have to wear a face mask, yes.
Well, then, if a large, particularly a large retailer, if a large retailer does not enforce that, and they're not enforcing it, then they're flagrantly ignoring it.
No, they're not flagrantly ignoring it at all. I think one of the questions that we have asked for, as far as clarity is concerned from the Executive Office, is who is going to enforce it. The PSNI have said that it's not their job to do it. We have said that we can be part of the solution, and we take that. We take our responsibilities very seriously in communicating to people that they should wear it. But we're not going to put our staff in harm's way, and we've been very clear about that. We have seen an uptick or an uprise in violence and abuse across the UK that is completely and utterly unacceptable. And you know, it's not written down in the regulations that it's our job to enforce it. If the regulations change, then certainly we can be a lot stricter. But I don't take it that we are flagrantly not enforcing it or doing anything to encourage people not to wear masks. I think it's exactly opposite.
I will check with the PSNI and the Justice Department how many incidents of violent incidences there has been in relation to shops in relation to this matter. One is too many, but I'll check. And again, I'm not asking for young shop workers to impose it. I'm asking for large retailers who have the resources and wherewithal to put in place measures that ensure that they are in line with the regulations, which is the law. That's what I'm asking for.
I shall certainly take your messaging back to our members.
It's in all our benefit. And the reason I'm not, because I've no interest in picking on any business, but if we don't all play our part in the sense of upholding the regulations and the restrictions we have now, we're heading towards a lockdown. And that for economic reasons, social reasons, a whole range of reasons, we don't want to go there.
I will, as I said, I will definitely take your messages and relay them to our membership.
Thanks, John. Gordon.
Right, thanks, Chair. Good to see you again. I thought but with that trimmed up beard, I was sure you were wearing a mask.
It was actually trimmed yesterday. Yes, before that, I looked like something out of The Hobbits or The Lord of the Rings.
You know, we're familiar looking at you. At least you haven't got your hat on today, which helps. I reckon you waking up every morning trusting and praying that the internal market bill will come through, because it'll be the answer to most of the problems with the unfettered access to and from Northern Ireland, which in the main businesses want and are longing for. Would that be fair?
It's not usually the first thing I think of, but yes, prima facie, it does do something for NI to GB, and the part about non-discrimination of NI goods, especially if we're talking about agri-food into the UK market and being part of those things like red tractors is hugely welcome, and it's a good step, but it doesn't cover GBTNI goods movement at all. It doesn't do what it says on the tin, which is to give that sort of assurances. And I'll go back to the fact that it causes a friction with the EU at a time when we should be really working on trust. We should be really working on the eyes on that prize of the FTA and some really common sense and sensible decisions from the joint committee. I think if the UK Internal Market Bill was to do what it was intended to do and to provide that unfettered access, which it moves somewhere between the NI to the GB stuff. But if it was to do that without rubbing against and causing that friction with the NI protocol and the withdrawal agreement, it would be much better. I think, as I'd said before, because of that uncertainty, for the EU, it's a problem of trust. For businesses, it's a problem of uncertainty, and that means that they can't build business models even for the next sort of 6 months without having that sort of clarity. You wouldn't buy a house if you didn't know that you had a right of way or an access to it. And the fact that some of this stuff is actionable and judiciable is a sticking point in us being able to give it a big welcome.
Right, you're coming round, I think, to our way of thinking, but just in relation to the workers that John and others have mentioned, I think we all would pay tribute to those that kept the food chain going right from February, March. I think they've done a great job, and the smaller supermarkets, the Spar type people that brought in fresh food every day and engaged, had young people working there in the front line. And again, it comes back to the PPE issue. I'm glad to see that a lot of those supermarkets have improved the hygiene and the PPE for their staff, and I think that's important that continues, and the points have been well made. In relation to the large retailers, we have a number of constituents who have raised this issue about staff within the large retailing organisations not wearing masks, and some people are get very irate about it, that they feel they have to wear them, but the staff within those organisations are not wearing them. When they've asked about it, when they've asked the management, in fact, within the stores, they've been told, we have plenty of masks, it's not an issue, but it's not being enforced, and at the moment they're not pushing it, and it does annoy a number of people that as customers they have to wear them, and yet the staff are not those that are interfacing with them. So the point has been made well earlier, but just I think it's important we could get maybe a bit of more of an encouragement on that, Aidan, through your organisation, because I think it is important that we have a consistent standard throughout these stores and throughout the various organisations. But thanks for your help, and I'll meet up with you again sometime to give you more stick.
I very much look forward to it.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gordon. Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Can we bring Sinead McLaughlin into the spotlight, please?
She's away.
She's still there, but was there anybody there?
Must be away shopping.
We'll go to Barley and then
Aidan, thanks. Is she coming?
Sorry,
there she
just
is.
got her.
Okay, yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sinead.
Thanks. No, didn't go shopping yet. Gordon, I'm busy laughing here because you didn't get the answer you wanted from Aidan earlier on. Be careful what you ask in case you don't get the answer. No, my question is, actually, Stuart asked the question of, what does a no deal look like? But it's my understanding, Aidan, that the exit summary declarations on goods going from Northern Ireland to GB were already being explored within the Joint Committee, and progress was being made to simplify them. And therefore, it was quite shocking that the internal bill had in it, more or less just to ignore and breach the withdrawal agreement. Is that your understanding too? Where are you feeding in to the Joint Committee in relation to simplifying the declarations?
It was something that was contained within our 67 questions in that paper. It was something that we had spoken about to the EU. Unfortunately, the Joint Committee negotiations and deliberations are done in secret. We don't know what they're considering, when they're considering. We just have little snippets here and there. I do know that it was something that was being considered. There's a big conflation here sometimes between an exit summary declaration and an export declaration, two different things. I think one is very easy, is more easy to solve, and that's the export summary declaration. And my understanding was, yes, that was being looked at. As far as why it was put into the internal market bill, as far as why the timing of the internal market bill was as it was, that's up to the government to explain. I think it's just another example, though, of a friction, and one of the easier ones to remove. But like I said, it's an example of a friction that does need to be removed.
I can feel the pain of all the business organisations and representative bodies at the minute, because you have more questions than you actually have answers. Just when you're there now, Aidan, in relation to the implications of the bill on the VAT regime for Northern Ireland, any more clarity?
None whatsoever. I think that is again through the Joint Committee. It was something that when we spoke to the EU on Friday, we brought it up, and actually a group of us also met with the EU ambassador to the UK last Thursday, and that was brought up again. I'll have to go back to the same sort of answer. It's one of those things that we need clarity on as soon as possible, and if that clarity included a simplification, that would be great. One of the big things that we had asked for during the initial withdrawal agreement from the EU, which they listened to and responded to, was the fact that we could be part of VASE and be part of HMRC at the one time. That was under the deal under the administration of Prime Minister May. It's not included in this deal. And there are a lot of people from the very, very largest companies to the small and independent companies, quite rightly represented by the FSB on the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group, who are asking those questions and still waiting to find out.
Okay, thank you very much. 99 days to go and counting.
Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Aidan, for your presentation. This has been most helpful, most useful, and I think it is important to say as well, from your own perspective, that it is evident that you've engaged in a very respectful way and listened to all views and opinions, whilst obviously trying to get your own message across on behalf of all of those that you represent. So I think it's important that we say that. I suppose what I wanted to get to, the UK government have described in Westminster the Internal Market Bill, and particularly, I suppose, clauses 40 to 45 as being a safety net, if you like, in case of the Joint Committee, and as you say, common sense. Now, I don't know if there's an awful lot of common sense going around on all sides at times, but would you share that analogy? I appreciate that we all want to see a free trade agreement. That's what we want to see, and I think everybody needs to work to that end. But would you, I suppose, agree that the Internal Market Bill does go some way to provide a safety net in the case that an agreement can't be reached?
Firstly, thank you for your comments about how the working group goes about its business. What we've endeavoured to do is to be pragmatic and to engage on facts and keep the politics out of it. And it's very much, I'm the convener of the group, but everyone around that table is absolutely equal, and everyone around that table has that same aim to make this work as best as possible for Northern Ireland business and for Northern Ireland households. On the clauses 41 to 45 and the safety net analogy, as I said, there are some benefits within this, and a UK internal market bill is needed. And the principles, those two principles of non-discrimination and mutual recognition, are laudable and admirable, in the same way as the UK command paper that was put out in response to the UK command paper and the protocol that came out. That was again laudable and it was admirable. Where it falls down is in the detail. If we're going to use a safety net analogy, a safety net only works if it is connected to walls or people holding it up. Those people are standing on a rug, and the EU could pull the rug from under their feet by actioning it in court. You cannot build business models on something that can be challenged judicially. So while the aims of this is admirable, it sort of falls down in the detail. If it was something that was agreed by the EU and rather than a unilateral UK measure, then it would be a lot easier for us to welcome it. And therefore, we continue to put our faith and our hope into the FTA arrangements as well as the joint committee deliberations.
Okay, look, Aidan, thanks for that. It was very useful, and I would agree with your last point. I think that's where we all should be putting our hopes and aspirations. Just a final point, because the issue was raised around the wearing of masks in retail stores, and it is an issue. Look, as someone who has worked in retail, I know the pressures that retail staff are under at the best of times, never mind with COVID. You know, and sometimes the public can be difficult to deal with in those settings if it's lack of stock or whatever the reason be. Now, it's a small minority of people, but it does cause a lot of stress. I just think, and I suppose further to John's point, it's not to put pressure back on retailers to enforce this, but it is something that we're going to have to grapple with. Because I have noticed, particularly over this last number of weeks, there has been a severe reduction in the number of people wearing masks, whether it be in shopping centres, whether it be in large retail supermarkets. And if there isn't sufficient enforcement of the issue, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that there should be a police officer in every store or that there should be, security. I think we just need to, in some way, get the message out to people, and unfortunately, it's probably going to have to come through enforcement because it hasn't worked with people's own free will at this minute in time. And the fact that we're looking ahead over this next 6 months of having restrictions and pressures, I think it's just we need to really get a solution to that issue, and I think that you will obviously have a huge part to play in trying to resolve that.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the best things about my job is that I get to travel across Northern Ireland and do store visits and talk to people who work in stores, talk to some of the customers, and there is a frustration out there that some people, and it's a minority of people, aren't fulfilling the letter of the regulations. Believe me, if I didn't have to wear a mask, covering this beard, it's sometimes uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. I spoke with the executive office who are leading on the COVID response last week about the need for more communication, for a strengthened campaign on this. I think the statements last night from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister underlined that and underlined the need for further communication. We're more than happy to play our part to communicate it. I think the High Streets Task Force it's one of those things that could be discussed there as a joined up approach, so everybody knows where the sort of burdens are or where the opportunities are to get those messages across. I'll certainly bring the messages from this committee to our membership and can assure you that we're more than willing to play our part.
Thank you.
Aidan, thanks very much. And just to reiterate what others have said, for all the work that you do in terms of communicating back and forth and informing us all as well, it is most appreciated. Just a final point, Sinead and myself are tomorrow meeting with the House of Lords, or the Chair of the House of Lords EU Committee in relation to the Internal Market Bill. Is there any particular messages that you would encourage us sharing?
Yes, I think those points on the only show in town really being the joint committee deliberations and an FTA. I think to put to bed the ideas about blockading one way or another, it's simply not on the table. And I think the other point that, even within the Business Brexit Working Group that we continually make is that this may be about trade. This may be about trade agreements and macroeconomics, but the ramifications for this are microeconomics. It's about household and families in Northern Ireland and making sure that they have the same affordability and the same choice and the same jobs as they have now.
That's really useful. Thank you very much, and thanks for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Niall.
Okay, members, moving on then to item number 6, which is matters arising. 6.1 has already been covered, so we'll move on to 6.2. There is a response at page 206 of your pack from the chair of the Further Education Colleges Principals Group in relation to colleges' experience with BTEC, and members will remember that we agreed to take views from the Principals Group.
Sorry, what page is that?
Sorry, it's page 206 of your original pack.
Right, thank you.
The chair of the Principals Group advises that prior to COVID-19, colleges had a broadly positive experience in terms of their relationship with BTEC, with no significant issues over the past 5 years. However, issues have arisen since the pandemic, including incomplete guidance and timelines based on the English school calendar, a lack of transparency in the awards process, and poor responsiveness to industry-specific qualifications. The chair also highlights that there are continuing issues with BTEC qualifications which are England-centric in both qualification titles and content. And members will also have seen a letter in their packs from the Minister at page 18 to SIA outlining steps for next year and encouraging working with Ofqual and with the Welsh awarding body. So I just want to take views from members on how they would like to proceed with this. You heard from the colleges about their desire for, I suppose, locally devised professional and technical qualifications that reflect, the needs of the local curriculum and businesses and, the wider community here. And obviously the huge number of awarding bodies was highlighted as well as an issue. So one of the proposals would be that we write back to the Principals Group seeking their views on how to move forward with this.
Yeah, Chair, I agree. And I think, if memory serves me right, previously Northern Ireland did set its own exam standards and its own exams for FE. And I think we probably need to be asking both the Minister to be supporting that, if that's what the colleges wish. I have a feeling that is what they're saying to us. And obviously we then need to be writing to the Department of Education and or SIA to see what their reaction to that would be. It's a sort of cross-cutting issue, but I think it's a very important one. And if we can stand over the standards of qualification that are delivered in Northern Ireland, then that allows us to tune the coursework, the content and the exam outcome to our local needs.
John, you were...
Yeah, I've no difficulty with any of that, but is it appropriate for us to ask SIA to come in to the committee to question about this? I recall, I forget who actually was presenting the evidence at the time around the flexibility of some other European states to respond. I think one was from maybe they used the Basque country as an example, where within 12 weeks they could turn around a qualification. And there's no better or no more uptime at this period we're going through, where you want to be able to be very quick in responding to the industry's needs. So it's something certainly we should explore further.
Okay, Chair, if members are agreed, then we'll write to the principals for steps forward. Chair, it might also be useful to get more detail on the colleges have said before that each of the 6 colleges is a particular hub for the development of courses for particular subjects. It might be useful to get more information on that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, the other point is about the number of awarding bodies that you mentioned. I did stick a question into the Minister about it, but I got a rather short response. just more or less that's the way it is, and the colleges are running with it. But and you know that all the bodies are accredited and approved and all the rest of it. But it's the number of them and the cost. It's something like £6 million or something we're spending on it. That's the sort of funding that's gone into them. But I would caution against reinventing the wheel. You know, we just have something, just to have it local, but it could be an expensive option. You know, but I think there needs to be some rationalisation of the whole thing. It's got out of control, and there are far too many, and it is, you know, relatively expensive. But yes, I agree. We do that. I think has this been raised? Are we going to send it to the department or not yet?
I suppose
Shared that with the department?
not yet, Chair. If members are content, we can do that. That's the other action we would propose. And once we get a reply back from the principals in terms of what they see as a way forward, then it means we can engage more widely. Also, Chair, as Mr. O'Dowd had said, bringing in SIA to talk through exactly just what the issues were. If members are content, we'll organise a briefing.
Yep.
Great.
So just for a point of information, was it 73 awarding bodies we were told, or is it?
I have heard the figures vary between 50 to 80. I think some awarding bodies, there are subsets. You know what I mean? You know, there's a niche within a particular body, so it is a lot. And as Mr. Dunn has highlighted, it means an awful lot of entry fees, and that money is then leaving here. Whereas with a local system, I suppose that money would be kept internally and would probably mean there could be certain economies. And with the market that there is here, you know, that would already present its own economies of scale. So I think that if we can get that sort of information out of the colleges, Chair, and then we can talk more widely then with the Minister with SIA.
Thank you. Moving on then to 6.3, there's correspondence from the Minister at page 9 of your table papers, providing an updated list of EU exit legislation, and it's quite a useful dashboard that has been provided there, so it's good to have that overview of it. So I just seek agreement to ask the Department to continue these regular updates in terms of the progress of legislation, and to put these documents in the pack for next week's briefing from the EU exit officials.
Great.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just thinking Sinead, can Sinead McLaughlin see and hear us? Because, there she is.
Yes, I can see and hear. Okay, thank you.
You can see and hear, sorry. No, she just texted to agree with the action.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Sinead.
Yeah, just make sure she's on screen.
6.4 then, there's correspondence, page 18 of the table papers from the Finance Minister in response to the committee's letter regarding a proposed database or portal to gather data regarding businesses excluded from COVID-19, and the Finance Minister has noted the letter and does not intend to respond further. The committee also wrote to the Economy Committee and the First Ministers in this regard, so members content to note. Okay, moving on then to item number 7, which is the impact of COVID-19 on higher education, teaching, access to facilities and fees. There is a letter from a local student at page 210 of your packs, and this correspondence from a student was regarding the lack of face-to-face teaching and access to facilities, and it was considered at our meeting on the 9th of September, and we agreed to return to it for more discussion. The student was of the view that students should not have to pay full fees for current circumstances. Obviously, this issue probably has developed a wee bit since then with the increased restrictions and plans that universities maybe had in place may have to be amended to some extent. And obviously there was the issue which UCU have highlighted in relation to face-to-face teaching as well. I suppose it would be useful to get more views around this issue in terms of from student unions and the teaching unions or colleges unions and universities, and maybe Sinead, you had asked for this to be put on the agenda, so if you want to speak to it as well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, like many members on the committee, they have been have been contacted by students that are concerned about the level of fees. They're still at the same level, and yet the mechanism for teaching is going to be done digitally, and are asking for the fee levels to be considered. And it's just something, you know, I think that as a committee we probably should discuss. And we do realise as a committee as well the pressures that our university sector is under financially as a result of COVID. So it's a very difficult one to balance. But that really is just the letters on the table now, and I think we should discuss it.
Chair, can I suggest, as you had highlighted, we're probably due to get more feedback from the university colleges, students' unions, and the UCU as well about a number of issues, including this. We also probably could usefully do some follow-up on the resolution of the numbers of places issue, where students have placed, whether there was an expansion of places. From what I'm hearing anecdotally, the numbers that we had initially seen being required haven't actually been required. Mm-hmm. But it would just be useful to get that in writing. And if we combine it with asking about these issues, if we highlight these issues around the fees and reduction in face time with lecturers, where lectures are now being delivered or deposited online, if you like, and there may not actually be tutorials going on as well. But it would just be good to get a view from everybody, all those stakeholders, as to what exactly their position is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, Chair, no, I support that, and I think it's important to look at the wider aspects as well in terms of the mental health implications of not being physically at meetings. But what I was going to suggest, look, it's not that we need more things on there's so much happening, but you know, would it be something that we could look at in terms of maybe like an informal meeting or an informal briefing from some of the relevant, as you've mentioned, Chair, there's some you know, student groups out there who may represent a wider body. It might be useful, and maybe everybody could attend, absolutely, but you know, if we have maybe an informal type meeting that might bring those people together and discuss the issues. I suppose to give it a fair look, you know, the issues are serious in fairness, and I think that, you know, to give it a fair wind in as soon a time frame as possible, I think that'd be useful.
We can step that up pretty quickly, and we'll try and aim for a time when members will be available. That might be more complicated than it sounds, but we can certainly get to that pretty quickly, because if we can do it virtually, then it just makes life so much easier.
No, I would agree with that. Obviously, we had wanted to get NES-USI to join us, and it was scheduled when we were in McGee, and obviously that has been rescheduled a number of times. But it would be very useful to get that discussion.
Chair, you know, it would be helpful as well, because I do agree with Gary in that single issue agenda meeting on that. If we could get a paper maybe produced just a short one on what other countries around the world are doing who've also identified this problem, because I'm sure it's not just Northern Ireland that has identified that students are unhappy with the level of courses that they're going to be attending, and also the cost implications, because I'm sure that the institutions are still facing the same, if not more. But then they're obviously not being able to provide the same service.
Yeah, and obviously it is very much about the student experience and all of this as well. So I think it will be very useful to do as John has suggested too.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Chair, can I come in here just for a second as well? There's another implication. You know, students have signed contracts and rental agreements for accommodation, and really they won't need to be actually in Belfast or wherever. They can actually do their courses remotely, and there's an implication there as well, you know, of unnecessary expenditure, and I've been told at the last minute that this is the type of their course content that it's going to be delivered digitally. So I do think that there are a number of other issues in and around this that we as a committee would need to discuss.
Chair, I think those are the sorts of issues that will be raised, particularly when we communicate with the student groups. There's further complexity when you get to that point of what still falls within remit and what doesn't. There's a lot of aspects of the whole student rental market and so on that doesn't fall within our remit. But absolutely, in terms of raising those issues and then passing them on to those who can enact remedies on that, absolutely we'll draw that into the sort of informal meeting as well as the correspondence we get.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item number 8 is the SR 2020-199, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020, amendment of certain relevant periods, regulations Northern Ireland 2020. There's a clerk's memo at page 212 and the SR and explanatory memorandum at page 213. Statutory rule will extend some of the temporary modifications to the corporate insolvency legislation that were included in the Act until the 31st of December 2020 and others until the 30th of March 2021. The rule will come into operation on the 29th of September. The examiner statutory rules not yet reported on it, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to the examiner of statutory rules report. The rule is subject to confirmatory resolution. Are members content with the SR?
Agreed.
So that the Committee for the Economy has considered the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020, amendment of certain relevant periods, regulations Northern Ireland 2020, and recommends that it be confirmed by the Assembly subject to the examiner of statutory rules report. Moving on then to item number 9, which is the SL1 Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act Meetings Amendment Regulation Northern Ireland 2020, clerk's memo at page 219 and the SL1 at page 220. The department sent a revised SL1 after the papers were sent with only one change. The SR is also by confirmatory rather than negative resolution. This rule is to extend one of the temporary corporate governance measures that was included in the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020. And it temporarily lifted the requirement for mutual societies to hold their meetings in physical locations until the 30th of September. This rule, or the statutory rule, will extend that period till the 30th of December. So this is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy, as it's not possible to amend once the rule has been made. Are members content with the policy implications?
I'm content with it, but you wonder why they wouldn't have extended to the end of the financial year.
I know part of the problem is the way the original bill was structured, which means why we're getting so many of these SRs is each aspect of the bill had its own separate mechanism for secondary legislation. So rather than be able to do it all in one go, it's done in these separate chunks, and some of them have different review periods. So you get some that are going to the end of the year, some that will go to the end of the financial year. But what will happen is probably ultimately they will all ultimately be extended at the end of the financial year, but it does mean an awful lot of secondary legislation will come through. It's just the unfortunate nature of the way that's structured. But I appreciate that there seems to be an awful lot of piecemeal to it.
So moving on then, item number 10, departmental consultation legislative proposals to ensure compliance with the EU Gas Directive Amendment 2019-692. There's a clerk's memo at page 20 of the tabled papers and correspondence from the department at page 22. The draft consultation is at page 30. The department proposes to issue a brief 4-week public consultation on proposed legislative measures to ensure the compliance with certain requirements in EU Directive 2009/73 EC, the Gas Directive, as amended by EU Directive 2019/692, the Gas Directive Amendment. The changes are largely technical in nature and not anticipated to have any significant immediate impacts. This is to ensure the energy legislation continues to operate effectively from the end of the current transition period following exit from the European Union. So if we seek agreement to respond to the department and to indicate the committee is content with the proposed consultation and will act as a super consultee once the results are available.
Just a brief aside comment, Chair. Having just asked us to approve a change in an EU regulation with regards to gas, which is important in itself, how does the UK government propose to cope with similar requirements to do this from next year? Given that civil servants in the EU will have written this, will have got agreement across all of the states, including the UK will have had to do very little, if anything, other than simply put the words into English on a piece of paper and subsequently send them to us. But in order for the UK to keep up, how are we going to be able to do that?
Chair, for us, with the design of the all-island energy market, the single energy market, that ultimately falls within one of the areas covered by the protocol, and it's anticipated that legislation will need to be in place to support that. So here, because of that market, the EU regulations continue to be relevant.
Right.
In terms of the GB market, they will be able to apply those if they want to be able to be part of the European energy market, but it becomes their choice to do so, whereas we still have that implementation as necessary because of the single energy market. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but it does highlight the interconnectivity of, you know, our gas probably originates in Russia, it comes right across Europe, it passes through the UK, the rest of the UK, it comes to Northern Ireland, it transfers north and south as well.
The standards on this are really unlikely to vary. I think
exactly.
Generally the drawdown will be from preferred international standards, and that's kind of where the EU will go, with obviously localised safety legislation around how you do pipelines, how you do installation and so on, and that's really unlikely to diverge, just because it's generally very good sense, if nothing else.
Okay.
Great.
Moving on then to item number 11 is the Department for the Economy's Corporate Risk Register. There is a copy of that at page 225. Following a request from the committee and a letter from the Permanent Secretary advising that it was necessary to redact some information which was of a personal or commercially sensitive nature. There are 5 areas where residual risk remains at a higher level, including sustaining the single electricity market post-EU exit, the HMS Caroline project, the financial sustainability of Ulster University, and vocational learners not being awarded qualifications, and one other area that's fully redacted. So do members have any issues that they wish to raise or any further clarifications that they want to request from the department?
Chair, just to flag up the first one, they're sustaining the SEM single energy market post EU is exactly really what the previous item was about. That's I think members will recall when we've been briefed before by officials, that's one of their biggest concerns, is having an up-to-date statute book around the single energy market. We have officials in next week, and I think it'd be useful to just sort of pin down some of those issues as to what might happen if they don't have the necessary legislative instruments in place. What happens? It's almost, I suppose, the idea of, is there an adjustment phase after a transition phase, just to make sure everything like that's tidied up. It's just, I know, something that people probably more widely will start to worry about. It might just be useful to get some kind of clarity on that.
Chair, just in terms of the risk register and those areas that have been redacted, and I understand that's perhaps commercial sensitive information, all of that, but we've no idea what size financially these matter. I mean, if it's about 10p, maybe we shouldn't be too concerned, but if it's about £100 million, then we should be very concerned.
It has occurred to me, sometimes, as the clarification said, sometimes it's personal information. Where there are small redactions, that's generally personal information or
there's
something
one whole
about.
Page of it here.
There's one that's entirely out. Number 10 is entirely gone. And I did rack my brains on this and couldn't decide what that might be. So, with members' permission, how am I going to phrase this? If I try and find out quantum, as Mr. Dixon had said,
I think that's,
but also just a general idea of what's in that, because it is entirely redacted. It's a residual risk issue, and not knowing anything at all about it does concern me in my own role of being able to advise you. So if members are content, I will try and quantify and get as much information on that as I can without breaking any rules.
Yeah, Chair, genuinely this is not an attempt to see behind the curtain, but nevertheless, I think when you see an entire section redacted and you don't know what the size of it is or what the nature of it is, it does raise concerns.
Yeah, Scrutiny Committee, this is published, okay, fair enough, you can understand why something might be redacted, but a Scrutiny Committee should have access. Unless there's a very, very good reason.
And that's Chair, that's what I said. I'd really like to pin that down, because obviously it impacts on the role that I play in terms of advising the committee. So for my own peace of mind, as much as anything else, I'll try and pin down as much of that as I can, and I will bring back potentially off camera what I find out, or come back with a plea if I can't get anything found out.
Okay. Can I ask Peter through you? I mean, is this the document that we have requested, or is this the one that's available to the public? I mean, they deliberately not given it to the scrutiny committee and redacted it.
Something like a risk register is FOIable,
okay.
But then your redactions around various aspects come into play. GDPR overrides a lot of things. So literally you can have a risk built around an entire person.
Yeah.
Say you've brought in a specialist for a particular key function. You then develop a risk around that person no longer being available or something happening or whatever else. So those kinds of things are generally taken out because they're highly personal information. In terms of commercial, that's as you would expect around where there's particular risk to particular deals, and again that has to be protected information. But where there's nothing, I'm not in a position to be able to advise or comment. Others I can advise around. You know, the redactions are logical, you know, for those. But where I don't know anything, that does mean that I'm in a position where I can't advise, and that's why I'd like to get the information.
Just like John, I mean, as a scrutiny committee, I think we should be privy to that information. I'm not widely experienced at Stormont. In fact, I'm just a freshman, like a number of other people that have been on council for 7-8 years. And that information would have been readily available. It would have been heard in committee, and it would have been the owners would have been on the councillors to adhere to the code of conduct and not to share that outside the room. But they would still be privy to the information and be cognizant of all the facts. So it would be quite worrying that something that would be in a risk register would be completely redacted, and as a scrutiny committee, you might not see any of it.
Chair, and that's my plan, is to get an unredacted. That's my number one plan, is get an unredacted copy to share with you in confidence, and that would be the ideal.
It's not an issue until that request is turned down.
No, not until. That's why I say I'll come back with information or a plea for further action.
And Peter, this is dated June 2020.
Yeah.
How often is the risk register updated? Because obviously some of them
that'll be part of every departmental board meeting, and is therefore published, you know, on a regular basis. We've got this as part of a regular set of updates. So, you know, it's published. We could bring it back more often if members wanted, but generally we do the sort of suite of updates, because a lot of it makes more sense seen in conjunction with other aspects of, say, the business plan or readouts on estimates and actual spending and those kinds of things. So,
I think, Chair, to tie it against projects that the department's involved with, like Project Stratum, there's a big risk there, you know, 80 million or whatever it is. You know, those are the sort of things we've got a list of projects that were ongoing to tie in with this, you know, to make sure they're covered from previous experience. And I think risk within this department is something that needs to be monitored and regularly reviewed, as you've already alluded to. June 2020, I suppose it's fairly recent, but things are changing with COVID all the time, and the risks are moving, and so maybe we should get further information just on how it ties in with all the spend, of course, as well. How the spend on that we've all talked about, you know, the grant schemes and how all that has been managed and how the risk has been managed. I think we could do with more information generally on it.
Sure, I'll take that back to the department and we'll report back in due course.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item number 12, which is the department's annual report and accounts 2019-2020. A copy of that is at page 264. Certificate from the Comptroller and Auditor General at page 370, and the Auditor has given qualified opinion on a number of issues. The non-domestic RHI scheme, unable to obtain sufficient evidence that the department's controls over spending on the non-domestic RHI scheme were adequate to prevent or detect abuse of the scheme. Tourism Ireland and Intertrade, due to the absence of a DEFE minister, it was not possible to secure North-South Ministerial Council approval for 2019 and 2020 business plans for Tourism Ireland and Intertrade Ireland. In the absence of business plans, expenditure in 2019-20 of 12.3 million to Tourism Ireland and 3.2 million to Intertrade Ireland is irregular until the NSMC approves the business plans. And then the small business grant scheme, an estimated 4.2 million paid to recipients who were not eligible under the scheme rules. So have members any issues that they want to highlight there?
Chair, the CNIG does a fairly good sort of background description of the issues there, and as members had brought up with the Minister before, it's one of those things where, particularly with the schemes, you go out with a scheme and then often flaws or potential ability for those who are ineligible to claim becomes evident, and the schemes were done fast, so it's not unusual. I think the CNIG does acknowledge that the nature of the schemes means that these things aren't a surprise, but at the same time he's still reporting on the basis that he always has, so he will qualify those aspects of the accounts. RHI, there's a lot of work underway to try and regularise all that, and there are schedules now for further inspections of properties and so on, but it'll be interesting to see whether there's further qualification on this going forward. Obviously the NSMC issue was can't clear accounts without two ministers, one from each jurisdiction.
Okay. Does anybody anything else they want to pick up? No? So moving on then, item number 13 is Invest NI Annual Report and Accounts 2019-20. There's a copy of that at page 441. The certificate of the Comptroller and Auditor General is at page 510, and the CNAG has given a qualified opinion due to issues around the small business grant scheme. In summary, the issue is an estimated 13.5 million paid to recipients who are not eligible under scheme rules. The Auditor General concludes the expenditure has not been made for the purposes intended by the Assembly and does not conform to the authorities which govern it. So obviously we raised that with the Minister and the Permanent Secretary, and that's been...
Yeah, Chair, just probably worth reminding members what was said was that CNIG used a sample group, and sample groups are what sample groups do. They will not necessarily be representative, and the expectation is that ineligibility loss is a lot smaller. And the Permanent Secretary gave the relative comparison with the full HMRC scheme, where they were looking at a 10% in eligibility, whereas here it's a lot smaller. Full figures on that will be eventually worked out once all of that process has been gone through. So at the meantime, you have that disparity between the estimate of the CNAG and what the department thinks is a more accurate figure.
Would it be possible to get an overview of that report in advance of the Invest coming in a fortnight's time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on then to item number 14, which is Bedford Street Development Limits Report and Financial Statements. There's a copy of the report at page 589, and the Independent Auditor's report raised no issues in respect of the report and financial statements, so are members content to note? And then item
Sorry, Chair, can I come in there? I didn't come in quick enough. It's regarding the audit report and Invest NI. I think it's worth noting the issue around the loan to Wrightbus, and that it was awarded before given formal approval from the European Commission. And I think it's important that we would ask the department, what they have done and in order to prevent something like this happening in the future. Have they changed the procedures in how to award loans? And also, I think it's worth noting, whether Invest has any view on who should be auditing a client business. This was a very small company that was conducting an audit on one of Northern Ireland's largest business. And I think, due process and governance wasn't there.
Sure, if it's helpful, we can raise all that with Invest when they come, because it's their process, and they'll be able to clarify. I get in touch with them so that they're prepared to respond on that, and they'll be able to give more detail around how that auditing process works. I think there is inevitably a lot of reliance on auditors following process. The there's a certain amount of that necessary and a certain amount of trust necessary, but obviously take on board the points that the Deputy Chair is making, and we'll raise those with Invest and seek an answer for next week.
Yep.
Or they will answer.
Moving on then to item number 15, MRDE Limited Report and Financial Statements 2019-20. There is a copy of that at page 626. The Independent Auditor's Report raised no issues in respect of the report and financial statements, so are members content to note?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Moving on then to item number 16, which is correspondence. There is a departmental response at page 668 regarding COVID support for a travel agency and tour operator. The department advises it's put forward an extensive package of support to DOF for approval, and DOF advised that it would be deferring allocations until September 2020. The Economy Minister has stressed to executive colleagues the need for decisions on funding being made urgently. So are members content to note? Correspondence from the DALO at page 670 regarding results of the evaluation of Public Sector Transformation Fund, which was designed to enable departments and ALBs to reduce bills through the voluntary exit schemes. Are members content to ask the department for a more detailed breakdown of the Public Sector Transformation Fund?
Agreed.
16.3, copy of correspondence, page 673 from the Finance Committee, containing a table outlining COVID-19 allocations. Are members content to note? Copy of correspondence from the Health Committee at page 675 regarding applications for first-year medical places, which has now been resolved. Moving on, 16.5 is a copy of correspondence from the Managing Director of a travel agency business regarding COVID-19 financial support. Is it members content to note or to forward this to the Minister in relation to what was discussed and
Agreed.
to the Finance Committee as well?
Yes, Chair. We've had a number. This has been the sort of most current issues have been coming from travel agents. I suspect members have had a lot of those as well.
Yes.
So if we gather those and then forward them onto the department to flag up as a key group that has identified its own, they've done their own surveying, they've done their own costings on this, and if we flag it up to the Finance Committee as well, because again, that committee is going to need to potentially intervene to encourage the Finance Minister, although he's already indicated.
And many members probably have received that correspondence, and it's a group that has been hit particularly hard and is unlikely to recover in
Anytime soon.
short term. So I think it is important that we highlight that. Okay, moving on then to 16.6, there is correspondence page 681 from the Committee for the Executive Office providing a letter from the Council General and Minister for European Transition in the Welsh Government to the Chair of the Welsh Parliament's External Affairs and additional legislation, detailing 10 priority common frameworks that have been identified for the delivery of Brexit. Are members content to note?
Agreed.
16.7 is a response from Treasury regarding the extension of the Job Retention Scheme and Self-Employed Income Support schemes. The Treasury outlines targeted second phase based on reducing support and getting people back to work. Are members content to note?
It's really worth flagging up because we were quite excited in the office. That came back within a week.
That's amazing.
We've never had such a fast response. We just
I suspect this probably Chair, maybe I picked it up wrong, but did you write again since that?
That is a couple of weeks
that's
ago.
literally
That is
from we sent it on the 17th. No,
The
that's
11th?
not true. We sent it the 11th, got a response on the 17th.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I suspect a lot of this will continue to get, given
I
the
think there's some traffic on Twitter as well that something is in process. There's some talk that a new scheme is being floated.
That came through. No.
No, that is not. Certainly, there's a lot going on Twitter about that.
Okay. Moving on then to 16.8, correspondence from a travel company containing the company's accounts as evidence of the impact. So, as we discussed, there's correspondence page 693 from NI Tourism Alliance to all executive ministers outlining the scale of the crisis facing the tourism sector. So again, it's an issue we're familiar with. Are members content to note?
Agreed.
Advise members, okay, this correspondence from excluded NI at page 706 was dealt with at last week's oral briefing.
Just we've rolled a lot of correspondence forward. That's why the timings are now a bit off.
16.11 there on page 707, there is a paper from think tank Pivotal on the main issues facing the executive as it returns from summer break, including economic recovery. Are members content to note? 16.12 correspondence from page 708 from a student from Derry who goes to Oxford University regarding the fact students here receive lower maintenance loans than English students. So are members content to forward to the department for a response?
Great.
Correspondence page 708 from the Association of Northern Ireland Travel Agents. Again, we've been
bundled that
it,
as
so
well.
we'll
Yeah.
send that on to the department. 16.4 20th report of the Examiner Statutory Rules report at page 735. Members content to note.
Great.
16.15 correspondence from the Dallow at page 51 of table papers regarding proposed subordinate legislation to transpose EU directive concerning posted workers into Northern Ireland legislation. A posted worker is an employee who is sent by his employer to carry out a service in another EU member state on a temporary basis. It's proposed that it will be necessary for this draft statute rule to breach the 21-day rule. The department will provide the committee with an SL1 following conclusion on a consultation with stakeholders on the proposals, and it will be a limited focused consultation due to time constraints. Are members content to note and await the results of that consultation in SL1?
Great.
16.16 then, there's a copy of correspondence from Chris Hazard MP at page 57 of table papers to the Economy Minister regarding support for travel agents. Are members content to note, given we've already agreed actions on that? 16.17 21st report of the Examiner Statutory Rules at page 58 of table papers. Are members content to note?
Great.
16.18 a press release at page 66 of table papers from Ulster Bank regarding a survey of SMEs and issues impacting on their recovery. Are members content to note that?
Chair, it might just be worth flagging up that the issues that are raised are some of the issues that the members were writing to ministers about sort of 3-4 months ago. So it's nice to see others have caught up.
Good.
Moving on then to item number 17, forward work programme. There is a draft forward work programme at page 747. The proposed meeting to be held in Upper Ban has been moved to the 21st of October and plans are being finalised for the venue and possible visit. So are members content with the forward work programme as concrete as it ever can be?
Yeah.
I think it might already be inaccurate. So.
Excitement builds.
Yeah, could we also, I don't know where it's at, I did mention the meeting, but in terms of the meeting to McGee, obviously it's been cancelled twice now.
Just right.
We should look at that again if possible.
Oh no, Chair, we're live on that. What we're trying to do is organise towards a best guess of a scenario at a time when we not have to cancel again. If members are going to leave that with us, we are working on that one, and we will get there.
It's low priority, Gary.
We will get there.
Before Christmas.
Well, that's our plan. Yes. That would be our plan. That hopefully would be our November. Is it? Because everything was in place and we know what we want to do, and it's really just getting it back on track again, And we need to do university visit as well, generally. So it would all sort of fall into place if we can make it happen.
So item number 18, any other business? I wanted to raise something, just in relation to, I've been contacted by issues in relation to commercial lending from banks and business customers, new business customers not being able to open accounts.
Yeah.
It would be useful, and we can all understand why that might have been the case when there was the bounce back loans, those things operating initially, but it's now becoming an issue, and it would be maybe useful to write to the banks and just get a view of where that currently stands.
That'd be great.
So we can do that, Chair.
Go ahead, Garth. Oh, sorry, John.
Actually, appreciate it, Chair.
You're right,
Yeah, no, I'm hiding here in the background, easily forgotten about. It's just to cover what happened earlier with the Minister. Look, I appreciate her time is privileged and everybody here wants to get questions in, but for those of us who are often at the tail end, probably my fault for not getting in earlier with the question. But you know, I think we need to really tie it down to no political statements, no statements at all, and a maximum of 2 questions. And if there is an opportunity to come back, then we get back round there. Either that or we get the Minister in for longer and we get our statement in written format. But I didn't feel that I got enough time to scrutinise today. I don't know what other members felt, but I know we've got a laissez-faire attitude potentially here, which is a good way of doing it at times. But certainly I felt that maybe others took longer than needed to be done.
Name and shame.
Well, we're all guilty at times, but I'm just saying, it's not just today, it has happened in the past.
Yes, it has happened.
You know, and we didn't do a full committee today, Chair, and in previous times other members haven't got a chance to ask a question. That is not good for scrutiny.
Chair, to be honest, the Minister's here, A, to be held to account. Secondly, if anybody's criticising me, I had 7 questions and the Minister was here to deal with COVID economy recovery. All of those dealt with it. And it is important that the Minister sets aside sufficient time to answer the questions of a committee. I accept John's point that you know, people can be flowery in their language or make political speeches, but when you're just simply asking questions and the Minister decides she's running out of time is really not acceptable.
John.
I think there's a balance to be got. I think the proposal that each member asks 2 questions and time allocated. And in fairness to a minister's diary is pretty hectic at the best of times. So an hour and a half, 2 hours to a committee. And the Minister has been in front of us several times over this last month or so, or 6 weeks. So it's getting that balance right. So I think if we try 2 questions per member and then go round again if we can.
Well, personally, this isn't the first time it's happened, but this, as you'll know, Chair, it's just...
No, I concur with you. Look, this isn't about... I think the Minister should be here, and I think that, in fairness, an hour and a half is quite a long time, given the frequency of a Minister. And in fairness, I don't think not all Ministers would make themselves available that length of time and that frequently. So it's not about, and this would apply to any Minister. I think that members shouldn't feel curtailed to ask whatever they want. I think they should be entitled to do that. I suppose it's something that I've raised in the past, is that I think we do need to be more structured. And I think that whether it be as a committee, we meet 15-20 minutes beforehand and try and tease out in terms of is there something that as a committee we need to get out here. Okay, regardless of what that issue or how uncomfortable it may be for individuals, I suppose it's just to try and it's to stop and this is not aimed at anybody in this room, but it is to stop the political speeches and to stop I suppose, showboating and just to get a tweet out, to say that, and that we need to get away from that, because I don't think it's very productive. First of all, to the constituents that we represent, in my opinion, I don't think it's very productive, because like after today, there were a lot of things said. But could you say that we made a lot of progress? In terms of the issues.
Well, we rarely do.
But it's a fair point. But I think it's made a lot worse. Sure, with all due respect, in terms of if one member feels that they're squeezed and feel actually, that they shouldn't even be asking a question, they allow other members in. Like I felt like I had to restrict it only to allow John in, because that John's as much elected as anybody else. So you just need to be respectful.
That's fine, and I think a 2-question rule is probably good if you're here discussing a specific topic, a specific subject topic. But the Minister's brief today was to come and deal with COVID and economic recovery. Now, I made the point that covers a very wide range of topics. If she'd wanted to narrow down the field and break this into a number of bites, she was very welcome to do that and say, I'm only going to cover X, Y and Z bits of my responsibility and I'll answer questions on that. But she was the person that opened the door to questions on every aspect of her department.
I think that, and it's not the first time it's happened that we've been squeezed in terms of our ministers' briefings and everybody being able to get in. And we do like to give as much latitude as possible, because it is important that members have the opportunity to ask the questions that they want to do. And the proposal of perhaps 2 questions, then you might get to go round again, is where you have the opportunity to come back in. So, Peter, have you any views around
I suppose, based on the conversation, there's maybe 3 or 4 suggestions. I think it is something we talked about in planning, about scheduling in maybe a half hour, 15 minutes minimum before a ministerial briefing for members to just talk about the issues they really want to focus on. Secondly, potentially, and I think one of the members did suggest it there, was asking the Minister to send the speaking note through, and we go straight to questions. That will probably save 15 to 20 minutes for question time, and then the moving around after 2 questions, so that we keep rotating. So getting the speaking note, going straight to questions, planning in advance 2 questions, kind of, and then moving on. If members are content, we can move forward on that basis.
Planning in advance is an experience which we did in the Justice Committee, and it was very helpful, because if you don't know what other people are going to ask, then you're covering everything as well. So that's another way of
it's something, Chair. It does. It works, and I think it is something that was raised before. We don't want to get to a time, and I do remember it in one committee, and I can't remember now why we were doing it. We literally had a timer. And it was horrendous. It really was horrendous.
I will stop going.
No, just I would agree. I would tend to go for the couple of questions and circulate it. But we're spending enough time in here without more time planning and fiddling about. And it did, when you start doing that, I think it takes the edge off it a bit, to be honest. I think you're better just giving people the opportunity to ask questions directly and manage it. And I think in the main, this committee works reasonably well. And the chair isn't bad. Sometimes she gets carried away herself with questions. We all can do. We all can do, to be honest. But
Chair, sorry to cut across. It's not supposed to try and sort of choreograph the thing. I suppose the purpose would be to stop. Well, look, if Stuart's going to come in and ask about HMS Caroline, then that's fine. That's okay. But we know that then I don't need to maybe wait around to ask that same question.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's not to stop us. It's just to give a bit of.
Yeah.
It's not to and this is the difficulty, I suppose, with giving a speech in advance, is that sometimes this committee has to be reactive as well to the issues of the day, and something may have happened overnight that the question needs to be asked. So that's the only reason. It's not.
And I'm very happy in those circumstances that the chair does that on behalf of the whole committee at the beginning, but we need to pre-agree that.
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
So that's us then in terms of AOB. Item number 19 is the date, time and place of the next meeting, which is next Wednesday in this room.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.